My name is Robert Franklin. I'm conducting an oral history interview with Aubrey Johnson on April 9th, 2018. The interview is being conducted on the campus of Washington State University Tri-Cities. I'll be talking with Aubrey about his experiences living in the Tri-Cities. And for the record, can you state and spell your full name for us?
My full name is Aubrey, Aubrey, Lee, Lee, Johnson, Johnson.
Great. So Aubrey, your parents came here, right? They brought you here as a small child.
Yes, my parents moved here in 1946, April the 2nd.
And where were your parents from?
They were from Mississippi.
Is that where they moved here from?
No, they moved from Mississippi to California, and then they went to Portland and worked in the shipyards. And just up at the end of the war, then they moved here after they heard about the Hanford project in order to gain employment.
Yeah.
My mom, she worked at the cafeteria, and my dad, he ended up working on the railroad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so we lived in various places. I can remember my mom telling me that when we first got here, not having a place to live, we stayed in the kitchen of a pastor, Reverend Stewart's house, for a while. And
Wow.
then after they got employment and stuff, we moved into a trailer, and eventually we bought a little small house, and we lived there for a few years. In 1948, they moved it down to the property that we live on now at 705 South Douglas. And it was a shotgun house, and I once asked, well, what is a shotgun house? It's where you can walk in the front door and you can look straight through and right out the back door. There was no rooms to the side. In there was a bed on each side of the wall. There was a heater in the middle of the floor, and there was an ice box. There was no running water, no bathroom, anything like that. And I stayed there until 49, and I went to Mississippi to stay with my grandmother. And I stayed down there with her for a year, and then moved back here to Pasco, and that's where I started, going to kindergarten and going to school.
Yeah. Um. So, and where were you born?
I was born in Vancouver, Washington.
Vancouver, Washington. Okay.
Yeah.
And were your parents living in Vanport? Do you
Um,
do you know?
I think they were living in Vanport because I know my mom talked about it all the time. Vanport, Bagley Downs, and
Mhm.
so I'm sure that was the area that they lived in, the Portland area.
What was your you mentioned your dad worked on the railroad. Was he a railroad man by trade, or was he just kind of a
He was a railroad man by choice.
railroad man by choice?
Yeah, any job that you could get, that's what you took, and you took whatever you could get first.
Right. Right. Um, what do you know about your parents' lives before they came to work at Hanford?
Um, I really don't know a whole lot about it for me to see it because I was a baby, but my mom, she would tell me stories about her living in the South and the wages that they had to work for, and she's like, son, I remember when I worked for 10 cents an hour. I worked 12 hours and made a $1.20 for the whole day. But, you could do a whole lot with $1.20. She told me about when they were sharecropping and lived on the farms and with her parents and stuff like that. There was 16 children in their family, and so it was really hard for them having so many, and they was all basically farmers. So you had to just try to scratch out a living the best way you could, especially when you don't own your own place.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're an indentured slave.
Mm-hmm.
You're in that situation. One of the things that kind of like impacted me as a kid is that uh, they never broke even. It was almost even, so it kept you there on the farm. So if you were trying to move or go somewhere else, it's like you're still owing. So if you owe somebody something, then you can't leave.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the situation until when she got to be 16 years of age, and then she got married and took off and left the South. And my dad, he told me that he had worked in restaurants and various places and different type of work. They lived on a farm also in Mississippi, and you know the struggles and stuff that he went through living there and how hard it was. But the good part of it was that they lived in the country, so the racist thing was there, but they wasn't impacted with it like the people was in the city, you know. And so that was a good thing, you know. And I think my growing up as a child, I wasn't taught to be racist. And so in our house, it wasn't talked about until I got to be about 14 or 15 years old. And my mom, she would tell us about the things that I just told you that happened to them, et cetera, et cetera. So when I started going to school, there was only 3 kids in our classroom that was of color. And 2 of them was Oriental, and myself being black, and we all played together. We laid on the floor and took naps together, etc. You know, and you find in kids there is no racism until it's taught to them. Mm-hmm. You know, and so we all got along really well, and so I didn't see that. And living where we were living at, there were Caucasian people that lived the next block up from us and over, which I went to school with, and we all got along really well, and it was a good thing. You know, I didn't start seeing the race issue until I got in junior high school. And one of the first things that I saw is when they had a dance that we all attended. And there was probably about maybe 8 or 10 black kids that went to the dance, and the rest was Caucasian. And all the Caucasian kids stood over on one side of the wall, black kids stood on the other side of the wall. And so after dancing with the 3 or 4 girls that was there, I attempted to ask a Caucasian girl if she wanted to dance, and she said, "No, not now." I said, "Okay." So I turned and walked back across over to where the other kids was, and when I turned around and looked, she was dancing with a young man of her own kind, you know. And that just kind of like, well, why she didn't want to dance with me, you know? So you try to reason out in your mind as a kid, well, maybe that's her boyfriend. But it wasn't a boyfriend because I knew who she was, you know. And so, you know, I couldn't understand, you know, why it was that way. Mm-hmm. And so when I went home, I told my mom about it, you know. And so she said, well, you know, she's probably forbidden by her parents. You know, they don't want us to intermingle because they're afraid that you boys will get interested in them, and this will result in interracial relationships. So that's the reason why it's that way. And I still couldn't really understand it. I had a friend, and his name was Nolan Bench. I went over to his house one day to play, and his dad came from Texas. And we were in the house and we were playing around, you know, and his dad come home and he looked at his wife and he looked at us and he says, "What do you got them kids in here for?" You know, and we just looked at him, you know. And his wife said, "You leave those kids alone and let them play." So when I went home, I told my mom about it, and she said, "What did he say?" He said, "What are those, the N-word, kids doing in here?" You know, and I told her, I said, and his wife said, "You leave those kids alone and let them play." My mom told me, she said, "Don't pay no attention to him. You gone on back over there and play." So the next day, me and Nolan Benz, we was good friends. I went back over to his house. And so, you know, after a while, his dad got so he'd come home and he wouldn't say anything to us, you know. And so we just kind of like grew up together until actually after we got out of high school, he went in the military. And when he came back from the military, he told me that his mom had passed. And he says, "Aubrey, you want to go and see my dad?" And I said to myself, "What on earth for?" You know, and I said, "Well, yeah." And so we went over, and his dad was living at right below the Blue Bridge in that trailer court that they had there. And when we walked in, his dad was sitting over in the easy chair, and he had this big head, no hair in the top, and just a little prickly hair sticking up on the side. And he says, "Dad," he said, "you know who this is?" His dad looked at me and he says, "No." And he said, "This is the little kid that used to come over to the house when we lived over in East Pasco." And he just stood there and looked at me for a minute, you know, and I guess he was trying to realize who I was. And then all of a sudden he stood up, you know, and which I thought was a giant of a man. But now mind you, I'm 6'3 and a half. I look at this guy, and he's only probably about 5'9", but he still had that big head, you know. And he says to me, he says, you know, I'm really sorry that I treated you kids the way that I did, you know. And that just really warmed my heart. Found out that he had cancer, you know, and shortly thereafter he passed, you know. And at some point, he realized how he had impacted his kids' lives and our lives, you know, by being the way that he was. And so he was just, I figured, trying to reconcile, you know, in his mind, you know, wow, you know, I did a bad thing. Because at some point we got to realize the things that we do and be accountable for them. As we get older, we can look back on hindsight and see what we should have did different. And I think that was kind of the thing that he had did, you know. And now there was a few other incidences with a friend of mine for his racism. North Beach in East Pasco. Caucasian people lived up there. And I heard that there was a covenant for them not to sell to any black people. Okay. And so Weehee Street was a street that ran north and south, and you could go north Weehee and go all the way through to the Dietrich's City Dump disposal. Well, anyway, my friend Mickey Donald asked me, he said, hey, Aubrey, you want to go to my house and play? I got a swing set. Well, I had never seen a metal swing set in somebody's yard. We had like a wood swing set, you know, and you had the metal ones at school. So I'm like, well, yeah. And so we walked up Weehee Street, and then we walked across the field and went in his back gate. We was in there playing for probably about 45 minutes or so, and he heard his parents coming home, because when they closed the gate, it was one of those metal gates, and clank. And he says, Aubrey, you gotta go, you know. And so I looked at him, and he says, run, you know. And so I went out the back gate, and I ran over to Weehee Street, and then I walked on home. So the next day when I went to school, I asked him, I said, well, what happened? He said, well, my parents was coming home, and you wasn't supposed to be over there. And I said, well, why did I have to run? He said, well, see, if you made it all the way to Weehee Street without them seeing you, then they wouldn't know whether you had been over here or where you had been. You know, and I'm like, wow, you know, that's odd that we played at school every day, you know, but then that kind of like showed me the racism that was there with his parents and stuff, because now I'm beginning to be aware of the racial issue by this time, because this is like in 57, 58, as we were getting older. And it was just kind of a bad thing to try to live through. So I'm going to fast forward. I've been out of school 55 years, and this will be my 55th year class reunion. I've never gone to any. And I was talking with a friend of mine through Facebook, and I told him, I said, well, you know, I'm going to go to my first class reunion this year. And I told him, I said, you know the reason why I've never came? He said, why? I said, because when I was going to school, because I wasn't a jock, didn't have that many friends. I said, kids never really socialized with me that much. I say, so if they didn't socialize with me then, why do I want to go and look at them now? You know? And I just thought within myself is that you can't hold yourself back with grudges and all the rest of it and stuff, you know, or thinking how it was then. You got to look forward to how it is now. And I said, I'm just going to go and just take a good look at all of them, you know, and see what they look like. And there was a few that, you know, I was good friends with. And I'm hoping that they'll be there and haven't passed on. There was this one guy that I was really looking forward to seeing, and he died here about 3 weeks ago, Dave Dalford. And he and I were real good friends as we grew up. His dad worked at, and he did also at Pasco Clothing when it was in Pasco. And but I just want to see, you know, what they look like and stuff. And so I had talked to this one guy. He says, man, he said, the last time I went to a class reunion was like going to an old folks home. You know, and I'm like, really? He said, man, everybody is broke down, you know, and really looking bad, you know, and it just kind of amazed me, because look at me, I'm 73 years old, you know, and I'm still holding on pretty good. You know, like people are like, you don't look like you're 73. Well, I'm not trying to look like I'm 73, you know. But, you know, you try to be the best that you are at what you do, you know, and you try to look as good as you possibly can. while you're doing it, and so it really makes a big difference.
It does. Yeah, you're the same age as my dad, and he's in. Sorry, Dad. He's in rough shape. Because he didn't take care of himself,
Exactly.
and so yeah, it does. You're yeah, the way you take care of yourself makes a big role. Plays a big role.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like my father-in-law told me about 40 years ago. It was a little longer than that because I was like 22 years old. He told me, he says, I want to tell you something. I said, what's that? He said, don't stay up all night, every night. He said, if you take care of yourself when you're young, yourself will take care of you when you're old. And with him saying that, I stopped going out, staying out all night long, because as a youngster, that's what I did, and 19, 20 years of age, man, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, come home, and then have to get up at 7 and go to work, and go to work all day and you're half dead, and those was words of wisdom that I just grasped, and I say, well, I know how to do that. I'll go out on Thursday night, and on Friday night, I'll go out, my wife and I, and on Saturday and on Sunday, I'll go to bed so I can get rested up for Monday to go to work. And so with that, I think it made a big impact on my health. As I began to get older, I didn't have all the aches and ailments that a lot of my friends did and stuff, because when I look at a lot of them, they bad shape, and not trying to brag anything like that. I'm blessed to be able to be still holding on.
Yeah, some good advice.
Yeah.
Good to heat it while you're young enough to actually make use of it too. Is
Exactly.
Pretty smart.
Exactly.
So, what part of Mississippi were your parents from?
My dad, they came from right outside of Jackson, Mississippi, Florence. And my mom, she came from Lyons, Mississippi, Lyons. And they lived on Mr. Pillar's plantation. See, I don't know what his first name was. His name was always Mr. Pillar. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so, my dad's parents, Willie Johnson and Charlotte, they had their own farm and stuff. And
were they sharecropping, or did they have their own?
No, they had their own farm.
Oh.
They may have had sharecropped before, but they had their own farm.
So your parents were pretty young when they left Mississippi?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, they're like 16 years old. I'm like, hey, I'm getting up out of here.
And what, I can understand, what was the pull factor of, you said they went to California and then Oregon, Washington. What brought them out there? And how'd they find out about the opportunity?
Okay, well, it was a better way of life. I'm sure that they had heard on the radio about the work and stuff that was going on out in Arizona, California, and so, you want adventure. You want to get away from the ism, the old way that it is, and go out and see what's new. Whether you can make it or not, you feel that you can. And so you kind of like, as you move, and I'm sure that they didn't just make one stop. They made a lot of stops along the way, and you probably worked a little bit here and made some money so that you could move forward to the next place and next place. Because I heard a lot of my mom saying, well, yeah, and we worked in Arizona, there for a while, and then we went to here and went to there. But I remember her mostly mentioning working in California at the shipyards, working at the shipyards down there. She says, well, I was a scaler. I didn't know what a scaler was, but what you're doing is that you're taking a chipping hammer and you're knocking the slag off of the welding and stuff. And my dad, he was a welder in the shipyards.
No.
And so she said, yeah, you go down in those tanks, but you go down in the bottom of the ship where they're doing all the welding and stuff at, and you work for long hours down there, and then you come out and get a breath of fresh air, and then you go back down.
Yeah.
And so then when they ended up hearing about the shipyard after it closed, I think it was during the period that they had that explosion, because I know she was saying that they were living in California. I forget what it was right there out of Antioch, California, Vallejo area. And it was a shipyard ammunition dump, and it blew up in Port Chicago. That's what it was. And so then they moved to to Vancouver, Bagley Downs or somewhere in that area, and worked for a few years. And when the war was over, everybody was hearing about this Hanford project, and they was building the mechanism for the bomb. And hey, well, it was just before the war was over. Let's go out there. And so in '46, I guess that was right at the end of the war, and that's where they came to, was out here at the Hanford area. And like I said, moved to Pasco and worked in the cafeteria. My dad, he went to work on the railroad, and that's where he worked at for a while. So you kind of like a jack of all trades. You just have to have a confidence level, say I can do it if anybody else can. Mm-hmm. As such as myself. I'm a welder by trade. I drove truck. I drove motor grader for years. I'm a cosmetologist. I had a restaurant, Aubrey's Barbecue in Pasco. I was a furniture mover when I was down in California. I've been a laborer. I've been an inspector on rock gravel equivalent and condensity tests and stuff. So I've been kind of like well-rounded and doing a whole lot of different things, and whenever a person say, hey, can you do this? Even if I couldn't do it, I said, yeah, because there's going to give you some instructions, or they're going to show you the way that they want you to do it. Mm-hmm. And so it gave me the opportunity to get in there. And so I'm sure my parents probably did the same thing. Hey, can you do this? Yeah. Well, come on over here. Let me show you how to do it. And then they show you what to do, and then that's the way you do it, because everybody wants you to do it their way. Mm-hmm. And so, if you was a dressmaker and you went to work for a seamstress, and he says, well, can you make this? Well, sure, I can. Well, this is the way I want you to do it. And so they're going to show you how they're going to set up the mannequin, and they want you to do it just like they do it. Even though the results would come out the same, they want you to do it their way.
Right. Yeah. That is pretty common. What kind of education did your parents go through? What was the highest grade they?
Mom, she had a third grade education.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And what happened after third grade? She had sharecropping.
Well, that's what she was doing. Mom told me, she says, and I didn't ask the question at the time, because like you say, I didn't know what question to ask. How old was she when she completed the third grade? Okay. And she wasn't 8 years old. She probably was 12 or 13 or 14 maybe when she completed the third grade. Because I remember her telling me that she was one of the oldest kids of the family, and she had to help take care of her brothers and sisters and stuff. She says, when I went to school, she said, I had to catch a turn row. And I'm like, well, what is a turn row? She said, when you came home from school, you had to work all the way down that row, picking cotton or hoeing or whatever you was doing. When you get to the end, you turn around and you work your way all the way back to the road, then you go home. And she said, and we only went to school for like maybe 2 or 3 months of the year, because during the spring and the summertime and stuff, we had to hoe the fields, cultivate the fields, pick the crops, and so there wasn't much time left for school, because you was trying to make it so that you had a living, and having a big family, it made it a lot easier, but then there was more mouths to feed and stuff, and like she said, well, son, when the Depression came, we never really knew it was a depression, because we had food to eat. We didn't have no money, but we had food, and I'm like, wow, that's really amazing, because the people that lived in the city, they couldn't grow food in concrete. Mm-hmm. So they had to wait for some kind of assistance for a kitchen or something. You see pictures of them standing around burning barrels and stuff, and everybody trying to figure out where they're going to get their next meal, but in the South, they had food and little of nothing, anything else, It's like you said, well, we made cotton sack dresses, and I'm like, well, what's a cotton sack dress? Well, the sack that they got their seed in, they would take it and cut it up and make dresses out of it. And, it was the ingenuity that they had with no education to be able to make stuff. Yeah. And like Mom said, she worked in dry cleaners for a long time, and she said it was like a sweatshop. It would be so hot in there, no air conditioning or anything like that, and you was in there washing clothes, and you had to do a steam press, and ironing clothes all day long. She says I'd be so tired. She said I worked sometimes 12 hours a day, and I would be so tired at the end of the day until I couldn't go to sleep. And I'm like, that's pretty doggone tired. Mm-hmm. To where you're so tired you can't go to sleep.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow. But my dad, I didn't really get to know him that well because him and my mom didn't stay together, and he left at an early age. And so I didn't get a chance to reunion with him until in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And I got a chance to, so my whole childhood basically kind of missed being with him. And then as he got older, there wasn't much conversation about the way that it was. It was about the here and the now and moving forward, because we had to try to live as quickly as we could, and try to have some type of camaraderie before he passed. And he lived in Michigan, and I lived out here, and he had a pacemaker, and I don't know if there was excuses or what. He's married again to another lady and stuff, and so everybody's running interference because they're afraid that you're trying to get something, and so they want to keep all their time. It's just like if you have children by your first wife and you have children by your second wife really don't want you interjecting with your children from the first marriage, because you take away from this. And so that was kind of the feeling that I got from that as a young man, and I look at it, and so, he said, well, son, let me explain to you, see what happened. I'm like, you know what? Let's not worry about the past. Let's just move on. So I didn't really get a chance to learn any history about him or how it was or how his parents was. I stayed with his mom and dad for like a little over a year, but, we was little kids out in the country. I can remember telling my friends, I remember we didn't have no car, we had to go to town. And when we went to town, we went to Jackson, Mississippi a couple times, and we were in a horse and a wagon. And they said, you wasn't in no horse and wagon, you ain't that old. I'm like, yeah, I might not be that old, but I'm telling you, we didn't have no car. That's all we had was a horse and a wagon. It looked like it took forever to get to where you was going. And my sister and I, we would hop off the back of the wagon and we would play and run along the road. The horse was walking so slow, and then we'd hop back up in the wagon. We went to church, horse in the wagon. We went to the little store in the horse in the wagon.
Wow.
And with talking with my cousins, they tell me that same store is still there that we went to back when we were little kids there in the early 50s.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm like, wow. I said, that's amazing, And the same old church, it they kind of renovated a little bit, but it's the same church right across the street from the cemetery. And I don't know what the name of that corner is, but, I was being told that, like my uncle, he was 103 years old. He died 2 years ago. And
wow.
Yeah. And my dad, he was 89 when he passed. And the year before he died, our conversation was, I sure hope I live to be as old as you is when I die. And he looked at me, he said, I'm not dead yet. I said, that's what I'm saying. So if you live to be 100, I hope to live to be 101. And I didn't know that my dad had cancer. And he died the next year. I didn't know that he had died from cancer till the year after he was dead. And I went back to Michigan to visit with my stepmom, and she asked me if I wanted to go to the hospice house where he had been. And, and I'm like, hospice house? In my mind. And so we went, and it was a new establishment, and I met the people that was there and his nurses, et cetera, et cetera. And once we got home, then I said, well, I didn't know Dad was at the house. She said, oh, yeah. She says, well, when you came out here, they had moved him from the hospice house home. And so he was basically at home so that he could die. And I was talking to him on the phone the week before he died, and he dropped the phone. And I heard the silence, and I asked my stepmom, I'm like, Mom, is Dad all right? And she said, oh, your dad didn't sit here and drop the phone. I said, is he okay? And she said, well, I believe they've been running some tests on him and stuff, but, they haven't said what's wrong with him, blah, 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 blah. But she wasn't telling me the truth. So I told her, I said, well, maybe I better come up there and see him. And she said, well, if anything happened to him, I'll let you know. And I'm like, I don't want to see him when he's dead. I want to see him when he's alive. And so that same week, I got on the plane, and I got there on a Monday. And I stayed until Thursday. And I came back home. And I told her before I left, because when I got there, I could see that he was in bad shape. I said, if he die anytime soon, I'm not coming back up here. And he died that Saturday, 2 days later. Wow. And I'm like, kind of blew me away, and then she kind of like got an attitude. Well, you coming for you? I said, I told you that I wasn't coming back up there. And this is my thing. My memory of my dad, seeing him sitting in the living room with his silk pajamas on, with his legs crossed, I don't see him dead. I see him alive. And so in my mind, that's the memory that I have, is your last memory. And that's my last memory of him. And I can see him right now. And when she said, could you help me take your dad to the bathroom? And I got up and I walked him to the bathroom, and she took him in there so he could do whatever he do, and then he came out and he said, your daddy want to go lay down because he's tired. And that's when I knew that the condition that he was in, but I didn't know that he had cancer, until the next year. But that's neither here nor there. But, it was just, knowing about my dad and trying to give you a sense of my not really knowing him. Yeah. And, my mom, she remarried, and so I was raised basically by her husband for a while. And then when they separated, it was, just me and her and my sister, and we just made it the best that we could as kids. I didn't get a chance to go and do stuff like other kids so much, because my mom, her thing was, because of lack of education, was work. Son, you got to go to work. Son, nothing comes to a sleeping man but a dream. Get up and go to work, and I wanted to go and play, and so my work was come home. We had chickens and ducks and stuff. You come home and you feed them chickens and them ducks, and you give them some water. Then you go out there and you water that garden, and you go out there and you hoe their weeds off of the yard and stuff. And we had a pretty good sized place. And so for me, it wasn't like go play. It was go to work. And so that was what she instilled in me, is work. Now my sister was completely different. Oh, sister, she's so smart, and blah, 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 and so it was like education for her. And she ended up going to college and but me, it was just like a struggle. And when I came home from school, I'm like, Mom, look, I got a C on my paper, and she said, oh, son, I don't have time to look at it right now. Just let it over there. I'll see it later, and so it made a real big difference, because my mindset was, well, she really don't care. And so, if you don't have that positive encouragement, it doesn't push you to be better than what you are. You know what I'm saying? And so it was like, as I grew up, I thought that I didn't have the ability to really learn. And so I was like very manual. Just show me how to do it, and I can do it. But the thinking part of it is that I didn't think that I could think the process all the way through. So it's like I didn't realize that I was as smart as I was until I went to school to become a cosmetologist, okay? And now you got to understand and learn hypernechium, how to spell it, the definition, pterygium, et cetera, et cetera. And like my friend told me, you got to burn a lot of midnight oil. You got to do a lot of reading. Now, it's really hard to read a word that you don't even know how to pronounce it, okay? And I was 43 years old when I went to cosmetology school. And I would ask so many questions until my instructor told me, Aubrey, just write them down on a piece of paper, and then I'll answer them because you're holding up the class. You see, now I was as old as my instructors. And so for me, it's like, wait a minute. I paid $3,000 some dollars to go to school, and it was through a rehabilitation class where I got my back hurt, right? I'm coming down here to learn. I'm not gay. I'm not a woman. So it's going to be harder for me to get the concept because I don't see it in my eyes the way that a woman see doing another woman's hair. So it would be just like me doing like, oh yeah, well, you know, I see it's just like this. And, you know, I don't see that in my mind, you know. So you got to like draw a picture, or if I see a picture, then I can emulate what I see, you know. But you know what is that I didn't let that hold me back. Man, I would stay up and I would read and read. I got some more tapes that one of my instructors gave me, and he says, take this home and put your headset on and listen to them. And I'd put them on and go to sleep with them on. And the next morning it would be as clear as a bell. I graduated with a 97 point some average when I got out of beauty school. And then I started my own business. You know, and I was able to do that. So it was like, it was a hands-on thing, and being very manual gave me the opportunity to learn it.
Are you guys doing something? Yep. Man. Interruption City.
Hey, well, it is what it is. Just like my phone over there doing this thing.
Phone's fine, yeah. Usually people know the door's closed.
No big deal, because you're going to edit it anyway.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So when you were, when you went back to Mississippi, I kind of want to, you know, how was Mississippi different from Pasco when you went there? What was remarkable to you? You know,
for me going there, because I was so young when I went back, is that I was free. That's how I felt when I went there, because we was out on the farm, you know, and so it's like I didn't see Caucasian people. I just seen our family, and our family friends would come over. It was just like the first time that I saw a truck, to know that it was a truck. It was a guy sitting up on the hood of it, and he had 2 horses hitched to it, and he was pulling it down the road. See, I'm used to seeing a wagon. So when I looked and I saw that truck being pulled like that, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I'm 4 years old, you know, and to me, it's like, is that the way it's supposed to be? So then when I started seeing like cars, the only cars that I seen down there in the country, because we live way back off the road, was the mailman would come down and put mail in the mailbox and stuff, and then they would leave. But people rode horses. You know, I just didn't see it. And so being there, it was freedom, and we was out on the farm, and we were kids, and the only thing that we had to do was harvest eggs and just play, you know.
Sorry, go ahead.
Out here, I had ate some pills and stuff, and I had gotten poisoned kidneys. And I was in the hospital up at Our Ladies of Lourdes. And I can remember this just like it was yesterday. They had me and this Caucasian kid in the same room. And my bed was on the same side of the wall, but it was first when you walk in the room, his was right behind mine. And he had a little whistle that was a motorcycle policeman, and when you blew it, it had little balls in it, and they would spin around the wheels. And so, you know, I walked to the edge of my bed, and he was over there blowing the whistle, you know, and I stuck my hand over it, and then he gave it to me. And I blew it. Now, imagine this. Now, I'm 3 years old. People say, oh, you can't remember back then, but I can remember this as well as I'm looking at you sitting over there across that room. And when his mother came, she demanded that they move me or move him out of the room, because she didn't want him in the room with me because I was black, I'm sure. And that whistle that I was blowing, she snatched it out of my hand and grabbed her kid up, and then that's when she made the demands and stuff, you know. So that was my first part of racism after I got to be in my upper teens, to look back on and see how it was. That's the reason why I make the statement of, man, I was free, because I was free from just that one incident that I can remember, even though there may have been some more. You know what I'm saying? So it was like when we would go to the store, my mom would tell us before we would, don't put your hands on nothing. Don't touch nothing, you know, when you go to the store. And so when we went to the store, we was forbidden to touch anything or do anything. We were just there with her, and that was it. You know, like she had told me, she said when they would go to the store when she lived in the South and say you wanted to buy a dress, you couldn't put it on and try it on. You just had to know your size, you know, and if you took it home, it was yours. Okay, because no one wanted to try on a dress that you had put on. You know, and nobody knew you had put it on except for the store proprietor. But that was one of the conditions that, you know, that they had. So, you know, it was just like little things like that after I got of age made me aware of how it was, you know, they're living in the South and how prejudice started to become. Because like I said, I wasn't taught to be. But then I heard about it, you know, and it just really didn't, you know, stick in my mind until up in the 60s, you know. And then when the 60s came, then I was really aware because I started paying attention. I had heard about Emmett Till getting killed down in the South and different stuff. When my granddad died, my dad called me and he says, well, you know, Papa died, you know, I want you to come down here and go to the funeral. Mom told me, she said, son, do not go down there to Mississippi. And I said, why? She said, because I'm telling you, them people will kill you. Because firstly, they know you're not from down there. And you are not going to be saying yes, sir, and no, sir, and all of that. She said, so don't go. And I didn't go. You know, I just heeded what she was saying because Papa died in 69. And the revolution, basically what you want to say of racism and trying to, you know, go to school, get an education, the Jim Crow sitting at the back of the bus, the freedom marches and all of that, man, they was killing black people like you wouldn't believe, you know. And a lot of it, you didn't really hear it on the TV, the bad side of it, you know. And every now and then they would show you, you know, people strung up and stuff like that. And so she wanted to make sure that I wasn't one of the ones that was in that situation, you know, without making it sound too horrific. You know, or she never said, well, you know, you got to hate white people because of what they doing to us and blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like my sister told me, she said, you got to love them to death. You know, and if you love them long enough, and that was the same thing that Martin Luther King preached, you know, pretty soon we will get over it, you know, and be able to live as one person instead of being so divided such as we are, you know. And I hate to say it, but I'm going to say this. In my mind, the only reason that racism is so alive is because the Caucasian people are afraid that we are going to do them the way that they did us. And you can hear them like, well, you know, I watched a segment on TV here just a few weeks ago, and this guy was saying that, well, you know, the black people, they are inferior, and the Oriental, they're first, and then we're second, and is that our numbers are getting so small until they're going to take over, and we are the superior race, and blah, 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 you know, and all this superiority stuff that they're trying to beat into your head because they are afraid. And there's no reason to really be afraid. Because, see, the first thing, black people are God-fearing people. And they love God. See, because it would be hard for me to really do something to you unnecessarily unless you was trying to do something to me. Okay? Because I'm afraid of what God is going to do to me. You know, that'd be just like going to the church stealing. You know, it's like, I'm not going to do that. You know, and so that racist thing is you know, it's getting worse by the day, and it's like they're reliving the past, all these guns and shooting people and police brutality, etc. Those were the things that was happening back then, and now here it is, a reoccurrence of the same old thing, and it's almost like, okay, it's okay to go out and be brutal when, you know, when you see they shot a guy 17 times, well, why do you just shoot him in the leg? Well, you know, we got to neutralize is the word. We got to neutralize, you know, so if we neutralize it, we just kill it, then we're done with it. Well, you know what? If you kill it, then the person don't have a chance to view his opinion. Well, he had a cell phone in his hand. Well, I thought it was a gun. But he's dead. You know, and so it's so that it's okay, and people allow it, so it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And you just wonder, what is it going to come to? Mm-hmm. You know? And it's the bad side of life, is that you wouldn't want everybody to pick up a gun and start shooting and killing each other. That wouldn't make sense. But see, to me, it's like out of fear, the people that's in power will create a war in order to remain in power. And we see that happening with China, Russia. The ones that are in power, they impose their will upon the other people, you know, and they will start a war in order to maintain that power. And it's kind of the sort of thing that we're doing here in the United States, is trying to maintain the power by advocating all this racist stuff that they got going on right now. And it's like, we need to get out of that and just learn that we all need each other to be able to live together in peace and harmony. That's the way it was designed for us to do. It wasn't designed for all of that. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's
out in the country in Mississippi, do you remember, was it pretty segregated out there, or was it mostly just kind of black folks that lived out in the country where you were?
It was mostly all black people that lived out there where we were. There was one Caucasian family that lived down by where our mailbox was, but I hardly ever seen them, you know, and 'cause like I said, we was quite a ways from the road and stuff, but it was mostly all black people. Now, when you went to Jackson, where my aunt and stuff lived, that's where the segregation was. Because now you're in the city, and in the city is where the Caucasian people live. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's just kind of like, say, East Pasco, it's the rural area. And so at one time, that's where all black people lived, mm-hmm. over on the east side, okay? And all the Caucasian people lived on the west side. You know what I'm saying? So if you didn't have a reason to be over there, there was no reason for you to go over there. See, so we lived in the country. And the only time that we went to the city was to go and visit my aunt and her family, and then we in turn left and went back to the country. So I didn't get a chance to really see that racist thing. Like I said, I was just a little kid, so right. I didn't see it there.
Just trying to kind of build a comparison,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I understand.
So I wanted to ask you about the kind of life in the Tri-Cities. How would you describe life in East Pasco growing up?
We was a village. We were a family. That was the highlight of my life, living in East Pasco until the 70s, when it was urban renewal came in and removed, replaced, you know, and I mean, everything to me was East Pasco. At one time, there was 4 grocery stores in East Pasco, okay? There was dry cleaners, and there was Kitty's grocery store, the East Side Market. There was a Tin Top, and there was JD's. There was 2 nightclubs. There was Norris's, and there was Kingfish Supper Club. I think there was probably about 8 cafes. And the Squeeze In Diner, Bobby's and Ray's, Haney's Cafe, Big Mike's. There was a cafe at the Tavern. There was Belgian's Pool Hall. There was Avery's Cafe. There was a little record shop. And so it was like everything basically that we needed was in East Pasco, other than we went uptown to buy clothes and stuff like that. And so, you know, for East Pasco, it was just like a family. It's like my mom would say, son, you be at home before the sun go down. And I mean, be in this yard. And she could yell, and I could hear her for like 3 or 4 blocks away. And then I would head home. all my friends and stuff that I basically went to school with, all of us black kids, because they was doing busing. Once we got off the bus, we all walked home together. We played together. We threw rocks. We rolled tires, and so it was a lot of fun growing up there. I hated to see it when urban renewal came, because what it did, it removed the black people from the little shacks, as they call them, the little homes and stuff that they had, to the projects, and then we lost everything that we had because all of that was gone. And it was just kind of a bad situation. It was supposed to be in the name of interests, the self-help co-op. Art Fletcher, I think, was the guy that came there that just kind of like pushed that over on us. We had no representation. When they got ready to open up that corridor to Big Pasco, they wanted to grab Oregon Street, and so that's a thoroughway from the freeway all the way to the river. Mm-hmm. Well, black people owned all that property and stuff from the railroad over. When I was growing up, we always heard that railroad property is worth no money. Okay, so when this redevelopment come in, it wasn't redevelopment, it was reclaim. They came in and the city, you had to sell it. They gave you nothing for it. There was a lady I asked the other day, her mom owned a block of land. I said, how much did your mom get for that block of land? She said $18,000. See, there was no representation, so whatever the city said, this is what you get, this is what you take. There was no negotiation.
Right.
And so that broke down our whole community, because from Main Front Street all the way over to Elm Street was all black people lived all through there. So when they took half of the way up to Weehee Street, it made it an industrial area. You couldn't go down there and buy any of that property 6 months after they bought it for the same price that they bought it for. That the price had escalated so much. And, it was just a travesty, because, say, it was basically probably a couple thousand people that lived there, and they built a housing project. And I can remember there was only 2 families that lived there that wasn't black. There was one Hispanic family and one Caucasian family. And I don't know what the capacity was, but the whole Arbor Elm project was filled with black people. So what happened is that the few dollars that they gave you, you ended up moving somewhere else if you didn't move in the project, out of state, out of town. And so slowly our little community just broke down to where it was nothing. And so now when I look at it and you say, well, what's over there on the east side? Nothing. There's no restaurants. There's no pool hall. There's no taverns to go to, even though I don't go to taverns anymore. But there's just nothing. And so everything was broke down. But as a kid growing up, vacant field, we go over and play baseball, me and our friends and stuff, or we could go over to each other's house and eat. And, it was like you was everybody's kid, because everybody knew each other. If I went over to Sonny Boy's or Leroy Milton's and he was out there raking leaves, his mom would say, Aubrey, you go get a rake and you go out there and help him rake them leaves up. You kids come in here and eat, that type of thing. And so it was just really a lot of camaraderie and playing and, and just having a lot of fun as kids and stuff. We would go over to the railroad and shoot pigeons when I was a kid and stuff. And that was one of the things that the boys did. We raised pigeons, bring them home and kind of doctor them up and stuff, the ones that we didn't kill. The ones we killed, we'd come home and pick them and clean them and eat them, And, people say, eating a pigeon, well, man, that pigeon was pretty good, And, it was a lot of playful times, and I had a good time living in East Pasco. I wouldn't have changed nothing. And just thinking of it, I moved from Pasco, and I went to California seeking a better life. Man, I'm thinking about all these things that I'm going to do, and all about how great California is. And I moved to Los Angeles, and I lived down there and in the rat race, and I moved from Los Angeles up to Vallejo, California, and I stayed there for a while. But let me tell you something. I couldn't wait to get back to Pasco. And when I came back, like I said, I got 2 houses. I didn't live on the west side. I moved back over on the east side. And I've had the opportunity, I don't know, countless times. People are like, hey, you want to sell that property? They send you stuff in the mail telling you about how much your property is worth and we'll buy it, or so-and-so want to buy your property.
Are you talking about the property in East Pasco?
Property in East Pasco. I get that all the time right now. And I'm not going to sell that property. That's kind of like my heritage. Mm-hmm. My mom gave it to me. I'm going to pass it on to my daughter, and I'm going to try to tell her, don't sell it. Keep it, because this is part of your heritage, you know. And I tell her the stories about when I was a kid being raised up, so that she can pass them on to her kids, because that's her history, my history. I didn't get my history because I was out of a divided family. My mom worked 2 jobs, and so she had very little time to spend with sitting down talking to you.
Where did your mom work?
She worked out here at the cafeteria in the Hanford area when she first came here.
Okay.
Other than that, she worked at the Hanford house, which was, she worked there for years as a dishwasher. She worked at the Top Hat as a dishwasher.
Where's the Top Hat?
It was in Pasco, across the street from the old post office.
Okay.
It was a Top Hat restaurant. That was the name of it. She worked there for years. And she worked cleaning house, doing day work for different people. And so, you know, pretty much as a kid, that's what she did. She'd get up in the morning, get us fed. And we had to walk to the bus, go to school. She got in the car, she drove, she went and did her day job, cleaning house. She left that job and went to the other job.
Wow.
And then she washed dishes, and so she always would have a night job. Wow. And she'd get home at sometime 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. You know, and when I got in high school, a lot of times I would go out and help her when she worked at the Hanford house up here. And I can't think of the name that it was called before then. It'll probably come to me later. But it was some other establishment that it was called that she worked there.
The Desert Inn?
Desert Inn, that was it. Yeah.
I was unsure as to when that stopped being. We have old photos of it in the 50s, like mid-50s, and it's still the Desert Inn. It's that transient quarters. It's kind of looks kind of like an L,
right,
or like a V.
Right.
You know, yeah.
Right. They added on to it now. They upgraded it, you know, made it look good. But it was the old Desert Inn. That was it. And I can remember in high school, I would go there and she would call me like, son, I need you to come out here and help me, because they would have a banquet, and they would get dishes from, it says Chinook Hotel, wherever that was from, towards Seattle anyway. And they would have barrels of them. And she would have to run them through that manual washer. Mm. And so what she would do is I would scrape them and put them on the racks, and she would take 2 towels and she would catch them when they was coming out. And then we would take them and put them in the barrels. And then all them pots, because she was, at nighttime, she had to have everything washed for in the morning. And I'd go out there, I didn't get paid for it, but sometimes we'd be there at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, washing dishes and washing pots. Then I had to come home and go to school the next day.
I was a dishwasher in a steakhouse for about a year. Yeah, it was rough. Washing dishes is rough. It was rough work.
I know. See, people that never did it don't realize how much work it is. You know what I'm saying?
You're really one of the most important people in the whole place. You can't eat on dirty dishes.
Nope.
Can't cook in dirty pots. But yeah, you're also the bottom of the totem pole.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
always the way it is with those kind of stuff.
But
So you mentioned earlier that you worked a lot in your spare time, right? You tried to play, but you worked a lot.
I worked a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember any particular community events growing up in East Pasco? The reasons the community would come together?
Bible school.
No.
Bible school. That was one of the big things that we look forward to in the summertime as an event for us all to come together and stuff. And the baseball games we would do. The school would have what they called wingdings, and they would
I've heard of that before.
wingdings. Yeah, it would just be like a little school carnival that they would have within the school, and they'd have a sheet up, and then they'd have the thing called fish, and you have a little pole, you stick it over, and they have a clothespin on it, stick something onto it, and they would have cake walks, and where you'd walk around in a circle, and they have musical chairs, basically what it was, and so it was always that coconut covered cake over there that I wanted, and so I tried to position myself so that I would be the last one, to sit down in the chair so I could be the one to pick that cake. It never worked out though. Yeah, but other than that, there was really no events that I can really think of. Bible school was probably the biggest one, because back then, most of all the kids went to church.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you attended church.
Oh yeah.
And which church did you?
I attended Morning Star Baptist Church.
Baptist.
Yeah, I was baptized in 1956. Yes.
And what role did the church play in the community, in African American communities in general?
Church was the cornerstone of the community. Basically, everybody pretty much went to one of the churches that was there. And for us kids, it kept us out of the streets, because that's what we did. We went to church. We would have junior mission one night. We'd have choir rehearsal one night. We'd have Bible study one night. Okay. Then on the first Sunday, we would go out of town, or we would go to different churches and stuff if we was in the choir and sing. And then it was like a all-day event. You get up in the morning, you go to Sunday school, you go back home and eat. Church starts at 11 o'clock. You do church. You get out of that at 1 o'clock, and a lot of times they would have a visiting church that would come, and we'd go back to church at 3. And so it was like an all-day deal,
Wow.
for going to church, But it was a lot of fun for us kids, because it gave us a chance to be together. And when we would go like to Bible study, they'd have you looking up scriptures and stuff in the Bible, and then the one that got the most, they would put a star. They had like this big thing with your name on it, and they'd put a little star for achievement, and so it kept you interested in doing that kind of thing, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And then it was like the preachers of the community and stuff. It is like they were responsible for the flock. Okay, so just like you got in trouble, say, with the police, or something wasn't going on right, the church was always had your back. They would go down with, hey, what's going on? What's happening here? We need to be able to attend to this situation. Is this person being treated correctly? The church was just like the pillar of the community, and it was always the backbone for the black people that could, like I said, we lived in the house with Reverend Stewart, which was the pastor of Morning Star Baptist Church, and it started in 1945, and we lived with him in 46. And so as I tell him, I say, I know if my mom lived in the house with the preacher, we had to go to church. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so when I look at it, when I go to church right now, even though there's a few people that's there older than I am, just like in their 90s and stuff, they haven't been here all their lives. And so I'm probably one of the oldest members of that church, Morning Star Baptist Church, because we lived with the preacher. So I know I was going to church when I was just a baby and a kid, and got baptized in 56 and been going there ever since, and still go.
What other churches were important to the
Well,
black
they had the St. James Methodist Church, and the thing was is that we all kind of visited each church, because whether you was a Methodist or whether you was Baptist, we were still kids that played together, and all the churches like came together. So if there was any type of a movement or anything, it was just like everybody was together. It wasn't so much segregation like now. They have Morning Star Baptist Church, they got New Hope, they got Greater Faith. Now we got 3 Baptist churches, and you got just enough people would fill up one. See, but it's all divided. And then there's Ephesus Seventh-day Adventist Church. There's St. James Methodist Church, and then they had another church that was over on the east side. I don't think it's black anymore. I think it's the Hispanic then took it over. But anyway, it's like back then it was just St. James Methodist Church, and it was Morning Star in the early 50s, and then later on they built New Hope, and then later on they built Greater Faith, but we were all kind of like together. You know, it wasn't the separatism like they have now with the churches. One church feel like they're better than the other church, or the members don't want to go and participate at that church. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I kind of like hate to see that, because I discuss that a lot. Is that one church, they got a real good choir, okay? And so when they have an event, you know, a lot of people go to their church, you know, and enjoy the music and so forth and so on, their program. But when the other church over there have a program, the people from that church don't participate. And so it would be better if all three churches, at least one Sunday out of the month, could come together and just be at one church. You know, it's like the bureaucracy go. Everybody worried about that dollar. If you could get the money thing out of your mind and say each Sunday we will all meet at one different church, and all the collection that we take in will go to that church. And then the next time we'll go to this church. And the next time it'll go to that one. Because everybody wants to have it, just like living here in the Tri-Cities. Why do we need to have 3 city governments? Okay? Because each one want to be able to get their money. So we got the mayors over here, and the city councils over here, and then Kennewick, they got theirs, and then Richland got theirs, and you know, but it's all basically geared to the dollar. So we're going to split it all up so we can split up this money, and then, you know, I got it, I'm going to keep it. I'm not going to let it go. You know.
You mentioned the housing situation kind of when you moved. You stayed in the kitchen of the pastor of Morning Star, and then you lived in a shotgun house, right? Until 48?
Yeah, I think it was 48. That's when my mom and them, they bought the little house, that little shotgun house that we had, and they moved it from on Oregon and Butte Street down to Douglas and Butte, and they bought some property there from a guy, Eldon Wallace. And I think my mom told me they paid $300 for it, and we bought 3 lots. And they set that little shotgun house up on it, okay? And then we as kids went to Mississippi. And so when we came back from Mississippi, I can remember this guy called J.O., probably was his name, what they called him, and he was a carpenter. And he had added on to that shotgun house 2 bedrooms, but there was no bathroom.
Wow.
And there was a faucet over in the corner that we got running water from.
And did you have an outhouse for the bathroom?
Yes, we did. We had that up until 1956. We had an outhouse.
Really?
Till 1956. I can remember being in the 6th grade, because the kids would tease us at school about us, you know, had that outhouse, and we had to, you know, go out there and use it. They would go in the yard and they would poke you in the back with sticks and stuff, and you know, but we didn't have a bathroom in the house up until then.
Because it took a while for East Pasco to get the sewer connections and things, right? That was one of the major complaints.
Right.
That the black community had in East Pasco,
right,
with the city, was the lack of water.
Right, the lack of water, lack of sewage before they put it down on our street. Okay, and so there was Elm Street, which was one of the major thoroughways through there now, and then our street, and the next street over. You know, some people had a cesspool, you know, stuff like that. Unfortunately, we didn't. We had to dig our own water line. And they dug it, and it came from the Methodist church down our house so that we could have water. And like I said, it was just a faucet. And you go in and you turn it on, and it was cold water, and then you boil your water. You know, I can remember being a kid where I had to take a bath in a tin tub. And they would boil water and pour it in the tub, and then run some cold water and put it in there for you to cool it off.
How did your mom do the cooking and cleaning?
Well, we had a stove. Okay. At first, they just had just like a little small stove, and they would boil water on it, and they'd set pots on it and cook on this little old stove that sit in the middle of the floor. I call it a heater because that's what it did. It heated, and they cooked on that little stove, and it was just with an iron top, and it was just real small.
Do you remember what it used for fuel?
Coal. He used coal. Yeah. They worked over at the, like I said, my dad worked at the railroad, and so they bring sacks of coal home. Okay, because he had to attend to the boiler over there, and so he would just get him a sack and bring it home, and you take and throw you some coal up in there, and it'd get nice and hot. So it was a warm little old place. I can remember that, but that's how they cooked until I think probably around 51. My mom got a real stove, and we had a propane tank sitting there, and so then we had like a real stove. We still didn't have hot and cold water.
How would your mom wash dishes and clean?
In a pan, boil water, pour it in the pan, and wash your dishes in the pan, and then had another pan. You take them and rinse them off, dry them off, and stack them up, because we didn't have no counters. I mean, we didn't have no cabinets and stuff like that, And they had just like a countertop they had made out of wood, and you just put them over there and put a towel on top of them. And it wasn't like you had no 6 or 8 piece setting. You know what I'm saying? You just had like 3 or 4 plates, and you had a few pieces of silverware, and you just made do with what you had, the best way you could.
How many siblings do you have?
It was just my sister and I.
And are you the oldest?
I am the oldest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who else lived in your community? Were there many families with children or extended family, like grandparents?
There was quite a few kids lived in the community. Yeah, there was a lot of people living in the community. Matter of fact, kids, and some had quite a few kids. I don't remember a lot of people living with extended families as far as their grandparents, because most kids, live with their parents. But I'm sure that there was some, that did. But I couldn't think of them right off the top of my head.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember when Kurtzman Park was established?
Oh yeah.
And how important was that to the community?
To the community, Kurtzman Park was kind of like a volunteer type situation, and of course we didn't have a park, and so when that was put in, it even brought our community together even more because of the camaraderie they had. They built the Kurtzman building. I can remember them putting in the trees and stuff around the park and helped dig the lines and stuff they had around there for water. And when we were kids, Mom would tell us, go down to the park. We could go down there and play. And so it was like a safe haven. And I remember there was a lady across the street, Big Irene, and butchers lived over across the street. And then there was California Street, was a street there that nobody even know about probably anymore. And they intersect. Okay, and it intersect right in the front of the park, and there was a row of houses there. And I could probably name you everybody that lived in those houses. And we would go there, and we could stay there all day long, and our parents didn't have to worry about us. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Because that was the safe haven, and that's where all the kids would go. And so it was a very important place for us. When we had our little meetings and stuff, we would have them there in the Kurtzman building. And, say, hey, we're having a meeting on voting or whatever it was. And we would go up there to the Kurtzman building. And that was before they put that Martin Luther King stuff in the latter years. So it played a real big part because I played there for years as a kid. And then after an adult, Kurtzman Park still was a big thing for me. We go down there and they'd have Juneteenth and the fun day and baseball.
I was going to ask you about, sport like activities and events. And Juneteenth was what I was going to ask you about. When do you remember that? First participating in that, or that first happening?
Oh boy, now that's something that I should really know because I am on the Juneteenth committee, and so I interact with them all the time and doing stuff right now. But that was probably somewhere in the mid '60s. Venice Daniels, I think, was one of the senior was one of the persons that helped get that Juneteenth thing started here because they was from Texas.
What does Juneteenth mean to you?
Well, it was when the black people got their freedom. Okay, we were supposed to got it when the emancipation was, but we didn't get it when the emancipation was. They didn't make you aware of it, and so that was a celebration for us. Okay, and it's just like when you say the 4th of July. The 4th of July don't hold anything for black people. You know, that wasn't our event, but Juneteenth was. And so what it is now, it's a time where it used to be everybody would come together. People that has gone and moved away from the Tri-Cities, Chicago, New York, California, man, when Juneteenth came, everybody would come back to town and just all enjoy each other, you know, and be together. And they'd have, you know, gospel events, and then they would have the food and the singing. They'd have baseball games, and it was something for the whole week that our children and people could participate in. It wasn't just a one-day event. It was a week event. And they'd have roller skating, they'd have baseball, they'd have basketball events, and you know, it would play right up until that Sunday. Well, that Saturday was the big day, and then the day after, you know, is like everybody would go to church, and you know, that was the end of it. But
you mentioned Vance Daniel Sr. was a big responsible for bringing that here. He said because they were from Texas. Is that a particularly a Texas event, or was it celebrated most strongly?
I think there was more of a Texas event, and the reason that I say that, the little history I know about Juneteenth. See, Texas was one of the last states to get their freedom because they wanted the black people to stay in the South to continue sharecropping and doing the work and stuff. Mm-hmm. And the ones that had left and had went to Texas, okay, well, they were trying to keep you going back to the South, and so they didn't tell you that the emancipation had happened, you know, so that you didn't know, so you went back. But once they found out, then that's when they got their freedom. So they say that Texas was the last state that got their freedoms from the Slavery Act, okay, at that time. And so I think that's why we focus so much on Texas. And when the Daniels got that going up here, and they're still kind of over that Juneteenth thing, is that they brought it from Texas, and that was the awareness of it. Okay, because if you had lived in Michigan, then I'm sure that you didn't know that much about it. But you know, it's like living there, and then that's what it is. And like, I should really know a whole lot about it because, like I said, I'm on the committee, but I'm sure that's what it was.
And there's still that celebration every year.
Oh yeah, every year. I tell you, we're gearing up for it right now. Matter of fact, on the 21st, we're having a fundraiser barbecue, which I'll be cooking, and over to St. James Methodist Church, and it'll be sold to the people at the community, and we hope to be able to raise a lot of money and stuff so to help to put on a lot of the events and stuff and bring new stuff, you know, and we could do a lot of recognition for people that's been instrumental in the community growing, and give trophies and plaques and you know, stuff for the kids, and for that they can have games and so forth and so on.
Can anybody come and
anybody? That's what we really try to get. It's not just a black thing. It's for everybody to come. You know, we have a parade and all of that, and so I think they're trying to incorporate some other people with their parades and stuff so that we can get the Caucasian people interested in it, you know? And see, it's like that old stigma stands behind East Pasco to where it's like, man, you don't go over there, blah, 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 and all this negative thing. And when
I heard that when I first
anybody can come to East Pasco, man, and when we having that event, we welcome everybody to come, you know, and come over and buy some barbecue, and they sell catfish and all kinds of food, man, and they even had some Hispanic vendors and stuff that was there, so that we can all enjoy it together, because that's the kind of thing that we can all have camaraderie and come together, because we can sit down and eat together.
That's true. Yeah, food is
You know
great.
what I'm saying? Yeah.
And I wanted to ask that kind of segues in very nicely into my next question. Do you recall any family or community activities, events, or traditions, including sports and food, that people brought with them from the places they came from?
Music.
Music?
Music.
Yeah. What kind of music?
Blues. That was blues and gospel. It was one of the two biggest things that we got, and most of that originated in the South. And they brought it out here, and it was like the cry, the blues, to me, when I hear it, it was like the cry for freedom. It's like the slaves in the field, they be singing them down home blues, and it was a cry for freedom. They was telling their story about the way that they felt, and when it came out here, it just kind of like, it was the big thing, with blues. It wasn't jazz. Jazz was in the city, but out here it was the blues. And then gospel music, was another form of a cry for your freedom and your love of God, to where you get into the spirit of, and the blues, you get into the spirit, because if you got you and your girlfriend just broke up, and things are not going right, and somebody break down and start singing one of them old down home blues, oh, I lost my baby, Lord, what am I gonna do? And here you sitting over there, and you and your woman just broke up. It makes you feel real sad, And now you kind of reflect, on your situation, and it make you think, wow, what can I do? Because now you want to try to rekindle what you just lost, bring it back together. And it was through those cries of the blues and stuff that made you do that. And so music was one of the most instrumental things that I saw.
Were there any notable bands, venues in East Pasco that you remember, or musicians?
I really don't remember any black people. That was Jesse Cleveland and a few guys. They had a little band. There was a couple, James Pruitt and some of them guys did like little stuff at church, but there was bands that came to Pasco and came through there. I can remember when Ike and Tina Turner came through Pasco, and Fats Domino, they came to Pasco when I was a kid and played music. So, there was outsider bands that came in, but we really didn't have any bands that I could think of. There could have been some older people that had little bands, because I didn't get a chance to participate, because my mom kept me at home pretty good until I was about 15 years of age. So I didn't get a chance to see and participate in. But after I got to be grown, there was Maurice Wallace and a few guys from Seattle would come down and play. And he was raised here in Richland. And Johnny Guillory, he had a little band with a few guys and stuff, and he came from Spokane. They would come down and play at Jackson's Tavern. And that was pretty much it for the bands that I can remember. Other than that, it was mostly gospel music and stuff, and that was like did at churches.
Right. What about food? Did your mom cook Southern food, soul food? Did she bring that with her?
Yeah, I was raised on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was raised on it, and my cooking experience, and I think I'm a pretty good cook. It was that she would always tell me, "Boy, come here and stir this pot," and I would say, "Well, why I got to do it? How come my sister don't have to go and do it?" And she would say, "You might get a wife who don't know how to cook. You come here." And so she made me learn how to cook. And I tell you the truth, I am a good cook and a well-rounded cook. And that was, like fried apple pies and stuff. I haven't had a homemade fried apple pie in I don't know when.
Sounds really good.
Oh man, they are. And I mean, it wasn't like you go to the store and you get this little teeny fried apple pie like this. Man, they were fried apple pies. Mom would cook. They would be that big, and I mean, they would be full of apples, big turnovers and stuff, And man, it'd be so good. Or sweet potato pies. She could really cook good. My niece Tansy, she can cook them and they taste just like my mom's, and chicken and dumplings. I cook some super good chicken and dumplings because I cook them just like my mom. And so at my church, there's different events that we have, the pastor's anniversary, the church anniversary, etc. And they say, well, Aubrey, what are you cooking? And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, why you guys always asking me what am I cooking? I don't see any of these other guys up here cooking nothing. It's the women that bring other dishes. But then I try to treat them to some of the dishes that my mom did for us when we were kids. And I can remember I did some chicken and dumplings. And I did a roast pan, one of those turkey roasters full. Man, they like to eat yourself to death. And everybody was sitting there and they were saying to themselves, who made these chicken and dumplings? Somebody said, Aubrey did. I'm sitting over eating and I'm not, gloating for no glory, and they're like, man, these chicken and dumplings taste just like the ones my mom used to make, and they went on. And so after that, every time they have an event, Aubrey, are you going to cook some chicken and dumplings? I'm like, no, I'm going to cook something different because I want you to get a taste of all the different things that I know. And I don't want to be like held down to where I got to cook chicken and dumplings every time it's an event. Yeah. We're going to have the church anniversary here in a couple of weeks. And they said, well, get up on the sign-up sheet. And they already, Aubrey, are you going to cook chicken and dumplings? I think I'm going to go ahead and cook some chicken and dumplings. Yeah.
But what other types of food would your mom cook to teach you how to cook?
Oh, man. Collard greens, mustard greens, turnip greens. She cooked roasts and potatoes, a lot of rice dishes and stuff like that. She made a lot of sweet dishes, bread pudding, rice pudding, chocolate cakes, which I didn't like because I don't care for chocolate, coconut cakes, peach cobblers, stews. It just depends on what time of year it was, and we ate a lot of vegetables. So when I say peas, like purple hull peas, I cooked some Sunday, black-eyed peas, crowder peas. We had speckled butter beans. We had lima beans. We had corn. We had collard greens, mustard greens, turnip greens. We had squash. And so, there was just a variety of stuff, but it was vegetables, a lot of chicken, very little pork, and very little beef. It was chicken. And right now I'm just like, I'm a chicken person. Right. I don't eat a lot of beef.
Well, chicken was at that time
staple.
was and it was one of the least expensive, right?
It was the least expensive. It was a staple food. We would raise 100 and some head of chicken every year, and so we would kill them when they got of age and took them and put them in the freezer. So we had chicken all year long. We would go to the river and we would fish, and so then we would have fish. Okay, and it wasn't so that we were so poor that we couldn't buy beef. We just didn't eat a whole lot of beef. Mm-hmm. You see, like, I don't eat a lot of beef. I don't care for steak and stuff. But number one, beef has got to rot in your stomach. Okay, and so when you eat a piece of beef, it's got so much connective tissue until it probably take about 3 days for the acids and stuff to eat it up. Okay, chicken, you can take a piece of chicken and you can do it like this here and you can crumble it. So it don't take very long for it to break down. Fish, of course, that breaks down really fast. And then you get all the nutrients and stuff that you're supposed to get from it, Because firstly, I think our body wasn't designed to eat meat anyway. We're supposed to be like, eat vegetables and fish. And all that beef and stuff, it's just too hard for you to eat. And like a lot of black people, they raise hogs. Because I used to buy a hog every year. After I got up in my 20s, and I'd butcher it myself and put it in the freezer. And We'd eat pork chops and pork steaks. But then when I started having high blood pressure, it was like, well, okay, well, I'm eating all that pork. So I couldn't tell you right now when the last time I ate a piece of pork, like a pork chop or a pork steak or a pork roast. I ate a piece of bacon the other day for the first time in probably over a month. I haven't eaten any. I eat a piece of sausage every now and then when I go to my girlfriend's house, but I don't eat a lot of it. But not chicken. I mean, I had some chicken tacos the other day. My daughter, she baked some chicken, day before yesterday. And so eat a lot of fish and eat a lot of chicken. And we eat a lot of vegetables.
What about sports? Were sports important to you growing up? Were there particular sporting events that the black community was really involved in, or any
baseball
teams?
Baseball was one of the most sporting events that we was involved in and stuff. And they would have, like I said, out at the park, Juneteenth. That was one of the highlights, was the baseball game and stuff that they had. As a kid growing up, we played baseball on every vacant lot that they had in East Pasco that we could get on as kids. It wasn't so much like playing tennis. I learned to play tennis when I got to be an adult. Basketball, man, I never had a basketball hoop, so I tried to play at school. But then, like I said, my mom was always like, well, you come home so that you can do this work here and, make sure that we had food and stuff. So
right.
That wasn't something that I got a chance to participate in. And plus, I probably wasn't that good anyway. Yeah. Because, you got to be, everybody can't be a Michael Jordan. You know what I'm saying? So you have to do what you do. And for me, it was like work.
Too true. Were there opportunities available here that were not available where you or your parents came from?
Yeah, most definitely, because in the 60s when equal opportunity came, it opened up the door so that you could get into apprenticeship programs that they had out here, and so that you could have make more of an income. And then the job market opened up so that you could have better jobs and stuff. So it was a lot better out here for being able to get an education, to go to school. Because in the South, it was my mom told me about when they went to school. She said half of the books wasn't there because the books that they got was the books that the Caucasian kids had. They done tore pages out of the books and stuff. So that's what you had to learn from, was the hand-me-down stuff that was no good. And so, you are only as good as your teacher. And if your teacher don't have the facilities and the stuff to teach you with, then you're not going to be able to get that much of an education as far as the books and stuff is concerned. Yeah. Now, some kids, depending on where they live, they was fortunate and they got a chance to get a good education. And a lot of times where it started off at is like their parents was working for some Caucasian people that had kids. They played together, and so they got a chance to read the books that those Caucasian kids had. But then when you were living down out there in the country and stuff, and you go to the little country school, and when the city or the county, whoever was giving you the books, is that they wasn't really trying to keep you, get you to have a good education, because they wanted to keep you so that you couldn't read, you couldn't write, and then you could always be taken advantage of. Okay, so that was the thing for education. And out here is that we got a chance to go to school. I got a chance to get the same opportunity as an education as a Caucasian did. I got a chance to read the same books that they did. I had some very loving teachers when I went to school out here. I didn't see that real prejudice thing from our teachers and stuff, And most of them was young, and the one that sticks out in my mind more than any teacher that I ever had, her name was Esther Day. She was my first grade teacher. And Mrs. Day was a mother figure to every child that went to school with us, especially black children, because she was the type of teacher that would, well, Aubrey, what is it about it that you don't understand? And she'd take and put her arms around you and she'd hug you, And so it made you want to do better, to learn more, just because of the way that she treated you.
Was she black or Caucasian?
She was Caucasian. I didn't have any black teachers when I went to school out here. They were all Caucasian teachers, but she was just
For your whole educational.
whole educational thing. No, it's just like trying to emulate what you see. There was no black teachers out here. There was no black lawyers, stuff. So how could I want to be a lawyer when I didn't see any black people being in that role?
Yeah.
Now, if I had been older when I left the South, then I probably would have seen some of that. But me just being a little kid, I had to emulate what I saw, and I didn't see that. My dream always was to be a truck driver, run heavy equipment, to be a police officer, or a beautician. And I got to be all of them except for the police officer, And
I wanted to ask you about that, kind of diverting from childhood here, but you mentioned a couple times. What was it about cosmetology that made you want to go into that?
it was a gift. It was a gift from the man above. When I was a kid, I say at the age of 7, and I remember very well, the girls were wearing poodle skirts, saddle Oxford shoes, and I had to comb my sister's hair. And she was a year younger than I. And I would pull her hair back into a ponytail, and then they take and you tie a ribbon around it. Mm-hmm. Man, I thought I could make that bow better than anybody that I knew, And I think that was my first introduction into like doing hair. When I got to be about 13 years of age, a friend of mine, Leslie Williams, his parents had a TV, and you would see different entertainers on there, and they had the finger waves in the men hair and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I remember this friend of mine, Robert Orange, he had put a process which was straightening his hair in, and he asked me if I wanted him to do mine. And so I'm like, well, yeah, So I came home one day from school and went over and he did it. Boy, when I got home, my mom was so mad with me. Boy, what you put that stuff in your head for? Is you losing your mind? What's wrong with you? But, we wanted to have the DA ducktail like some of the movie stars that we had seen, Elvis Presley, when they slicked the hair back and they had like the greaser with the little thing in the back of it, they call it a DA. And anyway, I got so that by the time I was 17 years of age, and wearing my hair straight like that in the process, I took and I started making finger waves. And I could finger wave it. And I got so good at it till I could close my eyes and I could see it. And I would comb it across my head and I'd go back and forth. And I'd end up with a horseshoe in the back. And when I went out and people see me, I'm like, man, where'd you get your hair did at? And I said, I did it myself. There's no way that you did that. I'm like, yeah, I did it myself. And so then it was like, well, do mine, and I'm like, $7 and you buy your own stuff. And so they went out and got them a jar of Parsners or Ultra Wave, or we use Easy Off. Anything with lye base in it would straighten your hair, right? And they would come over to the house and I'd put it on there. I mean, we'd be out in the yard with a water hose, and washing it out of your hair because we didn't know nothing about neutralization and stuff like that. So it's a wonder any of us had any hair, because the chemical didn't stop working, we'd just wash it. We didn't even have sense enough to shampoo the hair afterwards, And man, I would finger wave the hair, and I'm telling you, one day the guy told me, he said, man, you have so many finger waves in my head until it made me seasick. And so that was my introduction to it, and as time went on, I always had that interest in that. And so by the time I got about 18, 19 years old, it was like watching TV and 77 Sunset Strip, and you would see everybody in Malibu, California, and all that. And to me, that was a means, being around a lot of women, was doing hair. And so that also gave me a big interest in wanting to do hair. As I had said earlier, I had to go to work. And so when I went to work, it wasn't that I could go to school to learn how to do hair, but I would freelance and do different people's hair all the time, to make a little extra money. And so it was a friend of mine had a beauty salon. And he said, well, man, why don't you come work for me? And hey, you can come in here, you can work, blah, blah, blah. But, when I got off work from working for the county and stuff, I was so tired, I didn't feel like going and do it. I would just do it on the weekends just for myself. Mm-hmm. And I always kept that interest. And then when I think I was like 43 years of age, I got my back hurt when I was working down in California moving a piano. And so they gave me a rehabilitation. And what do you want to do? And I thought to myself, I want to be a beautician. And so the guys, well, why would you want to be a beautician? I said, because that is something that will be here forever. Because women are always going to get their hair done. Mm-hmm. See, I didn't want to be a barber. I'd have to do like 4 or 5 heads of barbering to make the money that I can make off of doing one woman's head. So, and that was the interest. And then I was pretty good at art, being creative. So after I completed my course and stuff and started doing hair, and then when people would allow me the opportunity to create, I could do my thing on their heads. Because people are so used to just cloning, they want the same thing all the time. And so it's really hard to say, well, hey, why don't you let me cut your hair? Especially with black women. Hey, I done growed it out this long. I'm not going to let you cut it off, because it took me too many years to grow it, right? And I'm like, well, just let me cut it so I can do it. And so they're afraid to let you be creative and do something until you find one person will let you do something, and then everybody says, well, I didn't know you could do that. I'm like, well, yeah, I can do it. I've been doing hair for 27 years. You didn't think I learned nothing? It's just that you don't get a chance to experiment the things that you know how to do and create new stuff, because people are so used to being afraid of getting their hair cut off and stuff. But that's how my interest came, was from my sister. And then it was something that I always knew that would be wanted and needed. And then it allowed me to be around a lot of women, And right now is that I enjoy being around women. And because women don't talk about stuff that men talk about, I listen to their problems and it just goes in one ear and out the other one. I'm not interested in a bunch of junk that guys talk about, because it's always the same thing. It's about women. See, women are more intellectual. They would talk about stuff that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? And so they'll be sitting there, and they'll just, well, hey, Aubrey, and you get to be just like a place where they can drop their problems. And what we do is we sit down and we try to solve the problems of the world. And they'll just like, well, what do you think about so and so and so and so and so? And I'm like, well, I don't know. What do you think? I throw it back on them to get their views and stuff, and see what they think about stuff that's happening. And women are smarter than men anyway, and I like being around women. Now earlier, it'd have been all about having a bunch of girlfriends, but you'd have a bunch of girlfriends, but you wouldn't have had no money. And so, I got smart to that, and so, my thing was, you don't date your clients, because you won't have no money. So, you just have your girlfriend and right, the other is just about getting paid and be done with it, and so, yeah. And I enjoyed it. It's been good to me.
You still do hair?
Oh, yeah. I have some clients and stuff, especially I like the old people. They can't get out. They shut in, and they'll give me a call. Hey, could you come over here and do my hair? And I'll go and do their hair at their house for them. And that's a blessing for me that God enabled me to be able to do it, because they are so thankful to, because they wouldn't be able to get it done otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I enjoy doing it.
That's really sweet. In what ways were opportunities here limited because of segregation and racism?
In the workplace. Okay. I worked for Franklin County Road Department for 13 years. And I started off with the survey crew. I was the first black person that worked on the road department. And I'm going to tell you, I called natural hell. It was like I always got the worst job dumped on. I can remember the first day that I worked on the road department. And my engineer, Pat Thompson, he said, hey, you want to work on the survey crew? I had just left the survey crew because the job had ended. Mm-hmm. And he asked me, he said, do you want to work for the road department? I'm like, well, yeah. And he says, oh, okay, we'll come to work Monday morning. So Monday morning I went to work, and he took me out to Chilwauna Park, and he wanted me to dig a ditch, me and this other guy that just had got hired, Bruce Sanders. And the ditch was probably from here to that wall over there, so I say maybe 40 feet. Mm-hmm. So we did is we measured the ditch. I say, we'll start in the middle, work to the end. You got 20 feet, I got 20 feet. That's being fair, okay? So every time I would turn around and look, he's sitting up on the side of the ditch smoking a cigarette. And I'm like, man, we never gonna get done with you doing that. So when I got done doing my 20 feet of ditch, he wasn't even halfway. And so I walked down to the river, and I threw a few rocks in the river, and I was walking back up the hill, and the engineer drove up, and it was right around 1 o'clock. And he says, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I got done digging my half. He said, I didn't hire you like that. I hired you, to work all day. I said, but we took half the ditch. I said, if he had got down there and dug the ditch like I did, instead of smoking cigarettes all day, he'd have been done. He said, I didn't hire you like that. I hired you to dig a ditch. And I said, well, then if I got to dig the whole ditch, take him with you. And I'll do it by myself. And he put him in the car and took him with him. And I dug the rest of the ditch, and about 4 o'clock, because we got off at 4:30, he came back and picked me up, and I was done. And so I worked patching holes in the road and stuff, me and this guy, Amos Whitmire, old guy and stuff, and did that for a long time. Then I started driving truck. And I can remember asking them repeatedly, well, when am I going to get truck driver wages? Mm-hmm. Oh, you haven't learned how to drive a truck yet. I'm like, okay, and I'm driving dump truck, and we're hauling gravel and spreading gravel, so forth and so on. So about 4 or 5 years pass, and I'm still saying, when are you going to give me truck driver wages? And it's still the same old story. Well, you haven't learned how to drive the truck, or, well, I'll have to go down and talk to the engineer, or I'll have to go talk to your supervisor. It's always a put off. Mm-hmm. So we had a meeting with the county commissioners, and the meeting was pertaining to how we got our funding for the road department. So they put a pie, and so we got so much from gasoline taxes, we got so much from this, we got so much from that, etc. So when they got through explaining how the pie was cut up, they said, is there anybody in here have anything else that they want to discuss? And basically what they were talking about is about that pie and how that money was cut up. Mm-hmm. Well, I stood up and I said, well, I do. And everybody turned and looked at me, my co-workers, supervisor, engineer, and the county commissioners. I said, how long do you have to drive truck before you get truck driver wages? I said, because I've been driving truck now for about 5 years, and every time I ask when am I going to get truck driver wages, I always get put off. And I don't understand why it is, because everybody else that drive trucks is getting truck driver wages. So that was the end of the meeting, and I left and I went back out to the shop. And my supervisor came out and he said, well, Aubrey, you didn't have to do that. And I said, well, I don't see why I didn't. I said, they asked a question. I say, and so that was I said that was the answer to. I answered the question that they wanted me to get. Well, no, they wasn't talking about. I said, I understand what you're saying. I said, but I wanted them to know that why I couldn't get truck driver wages. So about an hour later, the engineer came out. So evidently, the county commissioner's head went and talked to him, and he says, well, you'll get truck driver wages on your next paycheck. So I noticed one day my supervisor, he says, hey, Smokey, blah, 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 blah. I kind of turned and I looked at him, and because first I went like, who is he talking to? And he says, hey, Smokey, I want you to go over there and do so-and-so and so-and-so and so, And so I just went over there and did what he told me to do, and I'm thinking in my head, why is he calling me Smokey? Mm-hmm. Okay? Because, see, there's nothing black on me except for my hair at the time, which I don't have none now, because I'm paper sack tan, okay? And so it's got to be a word of ism or a racial slur, but it's okay. But see, the thing to me was I didn't really want to make a big issue out of it because I wanted that job.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And so now here's something I got to swallow this and go on along with the program so I can maintain this job because it was hard enough to get. And I had been putting in application after application. And I think that I had worried the Franklin County so much because every day I would go up to the Franklin County. I'm like, do you have any openings today? And they said, no, none today. I went so much until they finally told me, they say, you don't have to come up here every day. You know, we got your phone number. If we have an opening, we will call you. And believe it or not, I got a phone call on a Saturday asking me to go to work for the survey crew. And it was only going to last, I think, about 6 weeks. They was building SR-16, a road up out of Mesa. And I worked on that until the completion, and then I went over to working for them. But that was one of the kind of a bad issue for me because I had to live with that. And pretty soon, it just got so that I just let it roll off my back, okay? I can remember working out in the Road 32, 36, 38 in that new housing area in there off of River Haven, and they was putting in these oil streets. And so now we got a tanker truck with the oil spouts running off the back of it, and it's shooting tar out on the ground at 440 degrees. And so in order to keep the tar from getting on the curbing, they had me and another guy to walk along with a sheet of plyboard. He had one end with a rope, and I had the other end with a rope. And we kind of drug it along the edge of the ground and kept even with the truck so that the nozzle was right in the middle, you see, and it's squirting the tar there and it's not getting on the curb in that River Haven area. The next day, my supervisor says, well, you know, Aubrey, we're going to have Theo to go down there and do blah, 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 blah. And what they did is they took that rope and they nailed it to one end, nailed it to the other end. Now you take this and put it around your neck, okay, and you carry this plyboard along the edge of the curbing, and I'm walking up on the edge of the grass and stuff, carrying along the curbing. But this is the ironic part of it. The nozzle from the spray truck was right in the middle of the board. And when they hit the ground, what is that steam? It's going to come back up. Man, I would have so much tar on my face until my eyelids would be stuck open. Wow. Okay? Because you're getting that mist that's coming up off the ground, you know, and then you'd get so far down the road and you get through with the curbing and stuff, and then I would take diesel fuel on a rag and then wipe my face with it so I could get it off of my skin, and that, you know, kind of like burn your skin a little bit and stuff. Yeah. But it's just little stuff like that I had to endure in order to keep that job, you know. And I can imagine, which I never heard them making any ridicule, you know, laughing and going on. But, you know, when I'd go in the evening, I would take off my shirt and I'd be out there, man, and I'd have tar all over my arms and stuff, on my face, and get it off. No one never said a thing, but it always was that same old thing. You know, and so whenever there was a demeaning work or anything to be done, it was always, hey, Aubrey, you know, come over here, you know, and dig this ditch, or come over here and do that. You know, me and a guy, we was out unloading cross ties off of a truck. We was building the fence out there at Chiawana Park. And I remember he would catch one end, I'd catch the other end, and we throw him over on the ground. Another guy driving the truck along. So he drops the doggone thing on my finger, okay? Finger feels full of blood, right? Aching like you wouldn't believe. And it was this finger right here. And so he says, oh, you're just being a crybaby. Here, just a minute. He had this sharp knife. He took and he drilled a hole in it, and it let the blood out. Well, when the blood popped out, you know, then the pressure went off and it quit hurting. So we kept throwing cross ties. So the next morning when we went out there to go do it, they sent him to go do something else. Well, Aubrey, you can throw those cross ties off by yourself. You don't need him. So that's what I had to do. You unload that whole truck by myself with them cross ties. You see, and so it was like I had to strain to do it. Now, I was a pretty good sized fella and nice and strong and stuff, but it was a strain trying to drag them things off of there, you know, and then drop them right beside the hole and stuff, you know. Yeah. And when it would have been just as easy, we'd have got it done much faster if with two people doing it. You know, instead of saying, so what I'm saying is that I always got the demeaning jobs working for them, and I worked for them for 13 years, I finally managed to get truck driver wages, and then later on I got to run motor grader. And as my supervisor said, he says, "Boy, you're the best in the business." See, because I learned how to do stuff on a motor grader that most people couldn't do. I could do it backwards. And my supervisor, he was looking, he had been a motor grader operator, and he said, "I don't see how you do it." I said, "Well, see, it's real simple," but I never would tell him. So you got a level in your butt if you know it. And so if you're going down the road and your body the road tips and your body go over this, your body equilibrium always is going to keep you sitting straight up. Even though the road is set like this, your body is going to tip back the opposite way. Mm-hmm. You understand? And so all you got to do is keep your body sitting straight up all the time. So whether it's tipped like this, your body, you just want to keep it sit. So the machine is tipped over. You know what I'm saying? And so you're still keeping the same cut. And so to me, it was simple. So if I'm going backwards, and say like we're fixing a cross cut, I'd push across the hole, pick the moldboard up, drop it on this side, and then I would just drag it backwards. So if the machine started to tip this way, I just push down on this side and raise my body back up. And so I could do stuff. And he says, "Well, I've never seen nobody do it like that." But I never did tell them how to do it. So they would always come and get me. They had one guy which was the lead operator, and we were building a new road. "Hey, Aubrey, I want you to run first and let him run behind you." And boy, he would be so mad, because my supervisor said, "Well, see, you go straight, he goes crooked." So they want the shoulder of the road be cut straight. And so I'd get in that thing, and what I would do is I'd look down the road and pick out a fixed object and just head to it, and just keep it right between your legs. Mm-hmm. And so that would keep you going straight. And he'd be doing like this here. He would go in, so it would be crooked. So, it was a lot of stuff that I had to go through working for them. It showed me the bad side of a person in a good way. Mm-hmm. So I learned that you had to go through a whole lot to get a little bit. And now that I'm at the age I am, I can look back and I can see all of that bad stuff, and then what I try not to do is not to duplicate what I see. Yeah. See, and so that's why I say there's so much hatred in the world, and for no reason that it is other than just ignorance. And people have to learn how to get over it and start doing better by everybody else. Because I wouldn't want the same thing to happen to them that happened to me. So why would I do the same thing that happened to me to them? You don't. And for seemed like that should have been a lesson that should have been learned a long time ago. Mm-hmm. It's like, I hate to hear this term, illegal aliens. See, to me, an alien is somebody that come from outer space. Why can't they be just illegal immigrants? But it's a demeaning word that's used when all of us was immigrants to this country. I was born here, but this is not originally where we came from. Mm-hmm. So we all migrated here one way or the other, by force or by choice. Everybody wants some of the horn of plenty. That's what this is, the horn of plenty. That's why everybody want to come to America. And so it's like, I got it, you want it, you can't have it. And so by all means, it's like, keep everybody out of it that you don't want to have none of it. And the ones that's here, they want some of it, you try to deprive them of having it. Mm-hmm. And it's not a good thing, and it's racist for number one, and it's bad, and I don't know how people can live with themselves at the end of the day when they go home. Do they ever think about it? And they'll pray to the same God that I'm praying to. And I wonder, do they ever really think about the consequences of their actions? And if someone did the same thing to them that's being done, how would they feel about it?
What about your parents' work education? I'm thinking specifically about Hanford. How long did each of your parents work out at Hanford?
Well, my mom, she worked there probably like 2 or 3 years, and until they kind of like phased out that area. Because I can remember in the 50s, she was still working out there at the Hanford area in the cafeteria, and so she did like dishwashing, waiting on tables and stuff like that. Like I said, I was so young until I really didn't get a chance to really hear a lot about what she did. I know she married a guy named Eddie Gix, and he worked out there, and I can't remember. He did. He wasn't in engineering because he didn't have that kind of education. He worked in a machine shop. Yeah, and so he had to get some type of formal training from wherever he had worked at before, or whatever he did, he was shown how to do it, and then that's just what you did.
And this would have been your stepfather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Eddie Gix.
And was he Caucasian or black?
He was black.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about, how long did your father work for Hanford?
He didn't work for Hanford. My father, he worked for the railroad.
Okay.
Yeah, Eddie Gix, he worked for Hanford. And my mom, she worked out there at Hanford.
How old were you when your mom married Eddie?
She married him in probably about 49, 50, probably about 50, 51.
Oh, okay.
Somewhere in there. So I was real low, yeah.
Sure.
Because that's what I said. My dad, see, he left.
Right.
Yeah. And
so Eddie, you
Yeah.
were close to.
Yeah, I was real close to him. Matter of fact, I even carried his name, until I got into high school. I went in school at Gix, Aubrey Gix, Gix. And some of my friends, they see me right now and they'll say, aren't you Aubrey Gix? And I'm like, yeah, that was the name I went through in school. I say, but I'm actually a Johnson. That was my dad's name, and that was my birth name.
Mm-hmm.
But Eddie Gix was the person that that I could emulate, that I cared about. And so having a step parent is the one that do the most with you, is the one that you care the most about.
How long did Eddie work at Hanford?
I don't know actually how long he had worked there, because I believe he was probably working there before him and my mom got together. I'm sure he was. But until probably 54, 55, 5 or 6 years, somewhere in that period that he worked there, because probably about 56, somewhere in there, that's when they separated.
Oh.
Yeah, and so what happened is that he was working on the dam by then down at the Dalles, and he came up missing. So everybody thought that, because they did like a search for him and everything, thought that he had fell off in the water and had drowned, but he hadn't. He had took off, and he had went to Chicago. We found out, probably about 15 years later. He got in contact with one of our friends, my mom's friends. He looked in the phone book and he seen their name in there, and he called them, and then they got in contact with my mom, and then she was in contact with him. And he had left and went to Chicago and stayed with his sister and then did whatever. I didn't really ask a whole lot of questions about why or what he was doing. All I know is he was gone,
Mm-hmm.
And so by then my mom, she had moved on,
Sure.
And so she was just taking care of me and my sister and the best that she could, and she didn't have a husband. And so she finally got married in the 70s. Yeah, the latter part of the 70s, she finally got married again.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know what happened to that marriage, because I left and went to California. When I came back, that was over.
Oh.
So I don't know whether they was compatible, or if she was mean and talked too much, or what the situation was.
Could you describe any interactions you or your parents had with people from other parts of the Tri-Cities area that stand out to you?
My mom, she was kind of a private person, so we didn't really visit a lot. She had a couple friends that she visited with that I looked up to. Other than going to church, we didn't really interact that much with other people. Because, like I said, she worked 2 jobs, so she was too tired to really interact. We went to church. She didn't go every Sunday because a lot of times she was trying to fix something to eat for us and stuff, and she'd just be tired.
Mm-hmm.
And
I can imagine.
yeah, she had Aunt Etta B. was one of her best friends. Who that's what we called her, Aunt Etta B. Her and her husband, and they lived down the street, and they were best friends, and they would go back and forth and visit with each other. We would do the boat races. That was the big thing, the water follies, back in the 50s and 60s, and we would go to that every year. That was a big event for us, and watch those boats down at Sacagawea Park go back and forth. And they was doing like the circuit, because it was the little hydroplanes then. It wasn't the big stuff like they have now, the Unlimiteds. And your pen not working?
Oh, yeah, I got this. Oh, there it goes.
Okay.
It's got plenty of ink. I just haven't used it for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, where did you go to school?
I went to school at grade school at the naval base. That was my kindergarten. Then I went to Whittier School for a couple years before going over to Longfellow, and then back to Whittier School, 5th grade, 5th grade, and then over to Emerson School, 6th grade, and then to McLaughlin, and then from McLaughlin to the high school. And then I took I got ran over working for the Franklin County Road Department. I got my foot crushed, and so I got rehabbed. I went to CBC, and I took, I think I was about a year and a half, and I took a welding course. And I went to school at night, and I completed that and got a certificate of welding as a certified welder. And yeah, that was basically my schooling was right there, just right there in Pasco.
How did segregation or racism affect your education?
It didn't give me anyone to emulate, was number one. Because there was no black people there with a higher education that I knew of to really want to emulate. I heard about this guy called, I think his name was Duke Washington, and he had went to college. C.W. Brown and Norris Brown, they were basketball players for Richland Bombers, and that was in 50s. And so, there was nothing about academic subjects and stuff that made me want to be anything of a lawyer or a doctor or anything like that. So it didn't really impact my education. So racism, it didn't really hold me back from getting an education, because you could have went to school, but there was nothing there that enhanced. I didn't hear about a lot of stuff when I went to school that the other kids heard about, and I'm sure that it's like they never told us about going to college. That wasn't a thing that I heard about, going to college. When you get through going to high school, it was just like, try to go to high school and get a high school diploma so that you can go and get a job working in various workforces out here in the area, or getting into apprenticeship program or something like that.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
That you were able to get one, but
yeah.
But the structure of it was one that you didn't have role models. I mean,
no role models.
There were no successful blacks.
No.
Yeah.
No. So that there wasn't, and I think there was a few older guys. I think Tom Jackson, if that was his name, used to be a school teacher when he was down in Texas. Well, I didn't know nothing about him, And Joe Jackson, he was the first black mayor of Pasco, and he was a city councilman, and he was a dear friend of mine until dying here just a year ago.
Yeah.
And
I've been trying to talk to his brother.
Webster.
He's been very reluctant.
Yeah.
But yeah. I'm gonna have coffee with him this Friday, so hopefully we'll.
Yeah. Well, they just live right there on the same street, and so Joe, he and I we go down, and I'd sit there and, like I say, solve the problems of the world, and we sit and talk about different stuff like that. But he was a person of higher education, but he was an engineer. See, and so by the time that I was aware that he was an engineer, it's like I was up in my 20s.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's just like saying, hey, I want to be an engineer. What is an engineer? You know, and so there was nothing that was in school that you know, to me that set apart that was something that I wanted to do. Like I said, to me, I was like a manual. You know, I need to get into something that I can use my hands with to be able to do.
Right. Because your parents worked, your friends' parents worked.
That's all I saw.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Work.
Who, I wanted to ask you, though, kind of on the flip side of that, who were some of the people that influenced you as a child?
Now, that's a hard one there. Because, you know, like I said, there was really no big influence that was there for me. And I guess maybe watching TV. And it was just, I just didn't see it. You know, for me, my influence was just work. You know, just like when I would pass the truck lines and stuff, and I would see these diesel trucks and stuff out there, I was intrigued by it. You know, man, I would really want to drive one of those. Well, up here, it was ran by the Caucasian people, so it was my thing just to be able to get up in it and see what it looked like, you know. And I worked for a guy named Heather Thompson, and no, his name was Ezra Thompson, and he stayed out here by Cornell, and he was a farmer. And a friend of mine and I, we were just looking for work, and we was passing by his farm. I'm like, hey, let's go down there and see if he got something we can do. And so we did, and you know, and he looked around and he says, well, I got a bunch of tumbleweeds and stuff out there. He says, you boys can go out there and cut them, you know. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, and so my thing was never ask a man how much he gonna pay you if you want a job. Just go do the job and then get paid whatever he give you when you get done. Okay, so went out there and we was cutting tumbleweeds, and so when the end of the day came, you know, he says, well, I tell you what, he said, why don't you come back tomorrow? And so I came back the next day and went out there, and he raised Hereford cows and stuff, bulls. And we went out there and did some more tumbleweeds. And so he asked me, he says, well, I got a fence I want to build. You know, he says, you want to come back out the next day? And I'm like, sure. So I went out there the next day, and they had a diesel truck out there, and it was loaded with posts for fencing. And so he says, you know how to drive that truck? And I said, yeah. You know, and he says, well, then just go ahead and unload it. He says, and you know, when you get through unloading here, then just drive it down a ways, you know, and then unload because it was on a flatbed. You know, I'm like, yeah, okay. So, of course, it's got the instructions right up there in the truck, you know, and so all you had to do is just put it in one gear, and I knew how to, you know, drive a stick shift manual. So I got up in the truck, and I looked up there, and I kind of like read it because he was gone, you know, and then I figured out where it said air brake, and then I pushed it, and then the brake went off, and then I put it over in first gear and pulled my foot up off the clutch, and just kind of like walked along. I'm like, man, I would just really like to drive this on the highway because I want to get out of just one gear, you know. Mm-hmm. And so that right there was intrigue for me just to be in that truck. And I worked all the way to the end of the day until I got down to the end of the line and stuff. And you know, that was my thing with the truck. And so I would see different guys, you know, out on bulldozers. You know, and I'm like, man, I would love to just run one of them bulldozers, just get on it, you know. And I never did get a chance to get on a bulldozer or a tractor, anything like that. So it was just trucks. So when I got the opportunity to go into trucking, that's what I did. I drove a truck, and I drove a truck for years. And when I was moving furniture, I drove a truck down there in Northern California for about 4 or 5 years. And you know, that was my thing, was just, you know, being the guy thing, you know, was driving the big truck, do the big rigs and stuff. You know, I got on the bulldozer. I worked for George Gann. He had his own little construction stuff, and we was out doing the fairground. We did that over in Kennewick, the center part of it. And it used to be like a dump site, and we leveled all that off and made it to what it is now. And he had this big D9 Caddy he had rented. And like, you think you can handle that? You know, and I'm like, well, yeah. I jumped on it, and I was driving. I made one pass with it. When I backed up, and it took so long to get from point A to point Z to push that load of dirt that you had in front of it, I was done. I backed it up, and I got off of it, and I went and got back on the motor grader. Because you could see your quick results. That was just, you move a whole lot of earth at one time, but that was too slow for me, so I never did want to, run a bulldozer after that.
You did mention busing, and I just wanted to know, was that busing of the integration busing kind, or did you just catch the bus to go to school?
It was the integration bus. That was the ideal thing, is to bring the kids from the east side and the black kids to the west side in order to go to school together, because they brought kids, Caucasian kids, etc., from the west side of town over to integrate and went to Whittier School. And so there was black kids going to Whittier, and then there was Caucasian kids that was raised in the area that was there, and then from other towns. And then we went back and forth. And so that was something that I went through, was the busing at that time, back and forth.
And how long did that go on for you?
All the way up to high school.
What do you remember about that? What was it like to go to school with kids who weren't in your neighborhood, and to leave the confines of the neighborhood?
Let me tell you a short story.
Okay.
A bulldog will hunt if he like you. He's not a hunting dog, but he will hunt if he like you. So is that when I went to school with kids that was outside of my neighborhood, I was as I am to you. It's like you say, it seems like I've been knowing you all my life. Okay? And so I interacted with the other kids, and the kids liked me so well until I had a few friends that I brought home with me to spend the night. And I went to ask their parents, hey, Jerry wants to come and spend the night with me. You think it'd be okay? Well, if it's okay with your parents, it's okay. And so they came and spent the night with me, and we went to a wing ding and stuff, and it was just like the time of his life. The times that we spent together, and there was a few kids that was like that at school. But up until I got into junior high school, it was that we were all as one. Everybody just played together, had fun together. There was really no racial issues with the kids. The parents was probably racist, and I didn't really go to their houses and stuff. It's just like saying there was no reason for me to go to the west side because I didn't live over there. So I basically stayed over in my own neighborhood and did my own thing. But I went over to the west side to go to school with the kids. And when that was over with, I went back over. So whatever their views was at their house, I didn't get a chance to see it. I didn't hear it, because when they came to school, we were just all kids playing together, going to school together, and having fun.
Yeah.
When we got into high school, I think that was at the time when the kids got to be promiscuous as girls and stuff. They was afraid of the interracial thing, not having to be around those boys, boys period, and then especially the black boys and stuff, because you want to not have that interracial thing. And so it was something that was forbidden. And so at school, we kind of associated a little bit, but not a lot. That's why I was saying about going to the reunion, is that I didn't socialize with those kids. When we went, it was just kind of like, standoffish type of a thing, when you got on a one-on-one. But as long as we were sitting in the classroom, it was okay. Yeah. But outside of the classroom, it was a different thing. It was just like, I remember going to a parade downtown, and the girls that was on the float was throwing candy, and all of us kids from the school, we all just standing out there, and we were running in, we were grabbing candy, and some candy fell at my feet, and me being the dummy, I said, "Ooh, look!" And when I did that, the kid that was standing next to me jumped down and picked it up, and I'm like, "Well, hey, that's my candy," and they said, "Well, no, I picked it up. It's mine," but they gave me half of it, you see. And so that made the connection with us kids, to be closer, even though I'm sure at their homes, their parents probably told them something that was completely different, See, it was like my mom told me. She said, don't bring them to my house if you can't go to their house. Okay, so, and she was talking about girls, not no boys.
No.
Girls, Caucasian girls, she said, do not bring them here if you can't go there. So she was instilling in me a racist type scenario because I knew I couldn't go to their house. And so I didn't bring them to my house. And so then, we was able to, let me tell you this story here. I remember we had went to a teenage club, was called Avery's. And there was a couple girls that would come over on the east side and go to the club. And one was Ginger Frolic and this other girl, her parents, what was her name? Anyway, it was this other girl. Okay, and we were just friends. We wasn't dating or none of that kind of stuff. And I had a car. And so this one girl, she asked me, she said, let me drive your car. And like, we're in high school, and so I'm about 17 years old. I'm like, okay. And so we was driving the car, and I remember we went down Oregon Street, and when we got down to the corner of A Street and turned on A Street, we were getting ready to go to her house. And the police was coming up the street. And she had her lights on bright because he flicked the lights for your dimmer. That's when the dimmer switch was on the floor. And I told her, I say, dim your lights. And she said, what? I said, dim your lights. And so then she stepped on the dimmer switch. The police makes a U-turn, comes and he pulls us over. Okay, and so he asked for a driver's license. She showed him to him and stuff. And she had just turned 18. I was still 17. And so his question was to her, what are you doing over here? And because she was on the east side. And she said, well, I was over here and I was at the teenage club, and I was on my way going home. And he says, okay, well, I mean, you get there right now. Now, this is in Pasco, okay? And I'm going to follow you home to make sure that you get there. And so we're driving on, and she was living on 14th. Janet Kahn, her dad owned Kahn Construction. And so when we crossed Sylvester Street, they lived in a duplex right down the street, a brick duplex. And when we got to the house, their parents were standing out in the yard with their bathrobe on. Okay? Meanwhile, she says, just before we got to her house, she says, where do you want me to drop you guys off at? And I said, what do you mean drop us off? Because you're driving my car. You're not dropping me off nowhere.
Yeah.
And so, oh my God, what am I going to do? And so we pulls up in the front of her house, and meanwhile, the police gets out, and her parents is walking over. So they had called to the dispatch. The dispatch had called her parents, and so they didn't read her the riot act or none of that I was there, because once she got out of the car, I just slid over in the driver's seat and just pulled on off and went on, But then that made me realize that she didn't want her parents to know that she had been over there on the east side socializing with us black kids. And so that just kind of like put a wedge between the camaraderie that we had. See, at school we could be one way, but then when we wasn't at school in the private sector, then it was a completely different story, and it was kind of a bad thing, but hey, it is what it is, and
Did you ever have any relationships with any Caucasian girls?
Oh, yeah. After I got older.
After you got older.
Yeah, after I got older, I did. I had a relationship with a Caucasian girl. Matter of fact, she's an attorney now, and but I didn't have many. Matter of fact, I didn't have many relationships with girls, period, because my mom, she made me stay at home. So it's like I was in my 30s before I had a relationship with a Caucasian girl.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and but my mom, she, like I said, she always made sure that I was at home, working and doing stuff like that. Something that was kind of like I want to interject that I hadn't even thought of. She got appearances because we used to go swimming a lot in the summertime, and that was to keep us active and doing stuff and basically not getting into trouble.
Yeah.
Or doing stuff that other kids may do, you know, because we're at the swimming pool, your parents know where you at, they don't have to worry about nobody kidnapping you or doing nothing to you, you know, you're there. And then my mom would come and pick us up, okay? And so I often wondered, after I got in my 50s, my mom would take us to the Pasco Carnegie Library, and we would go over there and we would read books. And we joined the book club. And a few years ago, I was at the Pasco City Hall, and they have the showcase with memorabilia and different stuff in it. And I seen this paper that was in there. And it was on the celebration of X amount of years that Carnegie Library had been there. But when I started reading it, and it was saying there was a library, a book club that they had back in 1957 or 50, somewhere in there, you know. And then it started naming off all these kids that had participated and completed it. And I saw my sister's name, and it said Elaine Gix, because I told you that we were going under Gix's name. Mm-hmm. And when I saw that, I said, well, my name got to be in there. And when I read down and got almost to the bottom, there my name was. I was so excited until I started yelling, there's my name. And this guy walks up and he says, where? And I'm like, right there. I say, that's me, because I had completed that. The point I'm going to make with that, to parallel this is that every day my mom would take us to the library. Of course, we didn't want to go to the library. We wanted to go and play. Mm-hmm. And back in those early days, man, I'm talking about hot. See, it wasn't all these trees and stuff around here to absorb and put off oxygen and for it to be cool. It was like 108, 110, 116. I mean, days when it was 120. You know, it was hot. And my mom would always say, you can't go outside and play because you get a sunstroke. So she would take us to the pool. Then she would take us to the library. And you know what? I was in my 50s, if not in my 60s, when I realized why she took us to the library. It was so they had air conditioning. We didn't have to be out there in the sun. So the days that we didn't go to the pool, we went to the library, you know, because at our house, we didn't have no air conditioning, you know, until it got, you know, up in latter years, and we got an old swamp cooler, and then it was so humid. And then she would be there, you know, trying to cook and stuff, and she would come and pick us up at 5 o'clock in the evening and bring us home so that we could eat, you know. And so, you know, when I thought about it just a few minutes ago, the things that they did to ensure that we had a good, simple life that, you know, you don't even think about. And you know what? It was just amazing that I even thought about that. You know, is that it was really good to be a kid being brought up then. And then, you know what, is that I learned how to be visual at that age because I never got a book that was all words. I always got a book that had pictures. So I could look at a picture, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so after you completed reading a book, you had to go and give an oral report to the librarian of what you read. And she would take the book, and she would be thumbing through it, right? Man, could be so precise about what I read in the book, but I absorbed part of the writing of what I read, but it was the pictures that told the story. Because I'd always get a book that had pictures in it. And so it told the whole story for me. And that was why I was so amazed when I saw my name, because then it reflected back is that how I made it through that. And you had to read like a total of maybe 20 books within a month's period of time. So it was like, you know, that was a lot of reading. Now, my sister, she was like, she could read so fast until the teacher would tell her, slow down. Because, boy, it was just like, brrr.
I loved doing the reading club when I was a kid, too.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't because of the AC, but, yeah, my mom would keep us out of trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go to the library, do the summer reading program.
Yeah. Well, see, it was basically the same. It was the same. Keep us out of trouble. And then to me, I say, well, it was the air conditioning because we didn't have no air conditioning, you know. And then I'm a lot older than you, so, you know, you guys probably had AC in your house and all that. So it was, you know, just to read. But I'm sure that had something to do with it because, you know, they were trying to figure out how they was going to make it so that it would be easier on us. Because she would always say, I don't want you to go through what I went through.
Right.
You know, so you need to learn how to do this, this, and that, And for my sister, it was like, now, sister, you need to get an education. But me, son, you need to get out there and do this, and son, you need to get out there. So she made sure that, I had to be manual.
But it was still important, though, for her.
It was very.
I mean, because going to the library was an experience that she wouldn't have had.
Exactly.
As a kid,
Exactly.
So, practical reasons, but also, important, yeah.
Right. It was, because, see, it's just like going to school to be a welder or a plumber. Everybody's not able to go to CBC or to a college and get a master's degree. But, see, I mastered my skill. I have mastered being a cosmetologist. I know the theory of it. I have years of hands-on. I am a master at what I do.
Yeah.
When I went to school, I could show my instructors stuff that they would just sit there in amazement and like, wow, how did you learn that? Well, you know what? A lot of stuff I created myself, like doing finger waves and stuff like that. And I still do them and good at it and can show you some pictures of it on my cell phone. Anyway, it was just impacted my life so much of the little simple things that had happened growing up as a kid that I really didn't think about until after I got to be older to see the things that my parents had to go through in order to make sure that I was able to take care of myself.
Yeah.
I think that was the whole idea.
Yeah.
And my mom could look at me and said in her mind, he's not going to be the one that goes to college and get no degree. If he can just learn how to do something to where he can take care of himself and put food on the table and put clothes on your backs. And that's all they was really looking for then, because everything was simple. Right. It wasn't like living in a $300,000 house when you could live in a $20,000 house and be perfectly comfortable. Because in a $300,000 house, all you got is just more bills, and you got a certain level of expectation that goes along with it. You got to keep it in a certain condition and all of that, So I say there's only three things you're going to do in any house. I don't care how big or how small. Eat, sleep, use the bathroom. And you can do that in a cardboard box.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, since your mom, for a small time, a couple years, worked at Hanford, and your stepfather worked at Hanford, I wanted to ask, what was your reaction, or what do you know about your parents' reaction to learning that they had kind of worked at a site that was crucial to the development of nuclear weapons?
Like that was something that was never discussed. Matter of fact, I don't know whether they even really realize what Hanford was when they were doing plutonium and all of that, and because I had heard they built the mechanism for the atomic bomb and all of this different kind of stuff. Did they really realize what they were doing when they was working there? Because I heard just recently that when they came and a lot of guys was doing, black people were doing the cement work and stuff for these reactors and all of that, and they were going down in there and digging holes and doing different stuff, and they wasn't told, what detriment that was having on their body, and that, hey, later in 30, 40 years you're going to have cancer. They wasn't told that, even though the government knew it, but, it's like, hey, we got to get this work done. We got to have somebody down here to do it. So who we going to get to do it? And that's just the way that it was. And so I don't think that it was something that was discussed. It was a job.
Yeah.
So you didn't really realize what you were doing, And one of the things that like really upsetted me with this Hanford thing is that because I know of a lot of people, black people, that ended up with cancer. Man, it took them forever to get any money out of that when the Caucasian people had been getting paid all the time. And you go to the doctor and then you'd send all your research papers and stuff back, and then they say, well, you need this, or well, you don't quite have that all together. And it was just years and years and years because there was no awareness there. There was no person that was like really reaching out from Hanford to make you aware of of the monies and the stuff that they had out there for you to receive. A lot of times, I think people was already dead, okay, and then they family members. If somebody didn't tell you, hey, well, you know, your dad died, and he died from cancer, you probably need to get in contact with them out there to see if there's any monies that you are due because of his death from working in that, you know. And so it took them 20, 30, 40 years in there, because I know, like John Mitchell, he just got his money, and he was in that plutonium incident that they had out there before he died. I think he's been dead now maybe 5 or 6 years or something like that, and he had just got paid, and he was in it back in the 50s. You know, it was like totally ridiculous, you know, and to me, I don't know if you want to put it on saying being racist, but why are we so uninformed as a black people about the benefits and the conditions of where you at? You know, why you put me in harm's way?
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like, just kind of like blows my mind. You know, just like another thing I want to touch on, I had brought a couple things that I had did, and it was just like this one right here. Now, I was one of the persons that, and I'm going to let you read it, that helped formulate it and started. I was the first acting secretary of the East Pasco Better Development Association. And I did an interview with a reporter. And as you read it down, Aubrey Johnson said, blah, 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 as we went all the way down, okay? And it just behooved me that when they came out that weekend and we were out doing a cleanup, is that they took the picture of the Caucasian person, which was the president, to show that we was out there. Why didn't you take a picture of all of us out there cleaning up? You understand what I'm saying? And so to me, it's like, okay, we want to put the captain at the helm. You understand? And to show it. And when I mentioned it to him, he said the same thing to Dennis. He says, I don't know why they put my picture on there, why they didn't put everybody's picture on there that was out there doing the cleanup. You know, and it takes the emphasis off of, in my mind, of, you know, what it was all about. You know, and it goes down, well, Aubrey Johnson said, blah, 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 and he was a person that helped started this thing, and yada, yada, yada.
You also misspelled your name. Is it A-U-B?
A-U-B-R-E-Y.
Yeah, they also misspelled your name.
Like my daughter told me, she said, Dad, you get no credit. You know, and I'm like, yeah, honey, I understand how that is, you know.
Yeah, they spelled it A-B-R-E-Y. I almost missed it.
Yeah.
For a second, 'cause I was like...
Yeah, who is that?
Yeah,
they misspell it and they mispronounce it. And I don't know why it was. Always when I was growing up, person say, well, what's your name? I said, Aubrey. And they said, well, do you have a short name for that? I said, yeah, Aubrey. You know, and they said, well, Aubrey. I'm like, what it is about your hearing that you can't hear Aubrey coming out of my mouth to where you try to make my name be everything else except for Aubrey.
It's not really an uncommon name.
It's not.
Not the first Aubrey I've ever met.
Yeah, and it's a Southern name, yeah. Aubrey.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. And so, you know, I don't understand why people...
What did you know or learn about the prior history of African American workers at Hanford?
Would you repeat that?
What did you know or learn about the prior history of African American workers at Hanford? You mentioned a bit. You know that you knew that they had built some of the reactors and poured the concrete. I'm just wondering, you know, were you ever interested in learning, or did you ever take it upon yourself to learn about the contributions of African Americans at Hanford?
You know, I know a lot of them were scientists, because I have some of my friends and stuff that scientists that work out there for Hanford. You know, engineers and stuff like that. But I never really talked about them. I have a nephew that works out there, and like he says, well, I work on the Star Wars project, you know, stuff. So it's stuff that they do that they don't talk about. You know what I'm saying? And so it's kind of like held in secrecy, and so you don't get a chance to really ask a whole lot of questions about a whole lot of things that they do, other than doing the manual part of, I run a copy machine I work for the federal building, and I do this and I do that. It's just remedial things. But far as them being able to tell you exactly what they did, a lot of it was held in secrecy, and so they couldn't tell you. Not only that, I didn't have a whole lot of interest in it, and so I didn't ask them a whole lot of questions about it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, even today, only thing that I'm glad of is that I didn't go out there to work. Because I'm telling you, man, I see a lot of my friends with cancer that's all of a sudden, and I mean young guys, some of them are younger than me, and women, cancer. And where they get it from? They got it from out there.
What do you think is the most important legacy of the Hanford site?
It brought a lot of work here to the area. It opened up the doors so that pretty much anybody could get a type of job, even though you started off at the bottom as being a custodian. And kind of like, if you stay there long enough, you might be able to work your way up to a management part of it. If you was a lot of the black people that's here, that's in scientists and in managers and stuff like that, mostly came from other areas, Savannah River, different places like that, to come out here and fulfill the needs of the scientists and stuff like that. But there wasn't homegrown to go out there and work. So, it's like the basic person, if you get to be a manager or you got a BA degree and you can go to work, you might make it up to be a manager, but if you don't have an interest in scientists, or if you're not in drafting or engineering, you're just a basic hands-on scheduler or whatever. It pays good money, and so it gives you the chance to have a better living condition, better home, more money to spend for yourself and for your kids. You know.
What were the major civil rights issues for African Americans at Hanford and in the Tri-Cities?
Civil rights. Civil rights in Pasco was, I remember one time we had a march over in East Pasco, and we marched all the way downtown. And I think it was in the lateral part of the. No, it had to be in the. See, I was working for Franklin County Road Department. Started work there in '66, so it had to be probably about in '60, '68, somewhere right in there. I think if you research it, you'll find that someone set a tree on fire up there at Volunteer Park. But we had a march from the East Pasco, and someone had set a cross over there at Whittier School and set it on fire. And we marched all the way downtown, and we, we were chanting, "We will overcome," the conditions that they had. And it was basically like a outcry for the whole United States of America, because it was from the South, and then some of the same conditions that they had in the South, depriving you of the economics, the fair housing, all of that was things of concern. It's just like when they did that not East Pasco development, but the co-op and the reclaiming that area, and they built the housing project. Oh, wow, I got you. I'm getting lost in my thought, because there's a point that I want to make, is that my thought is just gone on that one right there, because there was a point that I wanted to make about that, and it was during that period of time. Oh, I know what it was, is that when they came in and they bought your houses, and they gave you a little bit of money. So what they did with my mom, we had a little old house, that little shotgun house they had built it on. They gave her X amount of dollars for the house, but we kept the land. Okay, and so what we did, we built another house, which is the one that's there now. And the contractors that they had to do it, as far as I'm concerned, they didn't have no inspectors, or they just didn't care, because the houses that they built was half built. They wasn't built right. The guy that puts in the the patio door is either put in backwards, because the screen should be on the outside, not on the inside. So that door should have been over here, okay? Mm-hmm. But you wouldn't walk in from this end because you're up against a dead wall. So they put it in anyway. Or like the dishwasher, they put it in and there was nothing for it to bolt to except for the little edge that was about a quarter strip wide, and they put 2 screws to hold that in there. And what is the vibration going to do? Tear it up. So my mom never did use it. She'd wash dishes in the sink because it busted that. And I was like, Mom, they're not doing that right now, son. You just, they're not, just leave that alone now. They know what they're doing, you see. And so since she was from the South, never having a voice, she didn't want to really complain a whole lot about the construction of the house. But I didn't live there, and I'm looking at it being done, and I'm like, Mom, they're not doing this right. Mm-hmm. I'm not a carpenter, but I mean, some stuff you can just see. It's like in our hallway, okay? If you put a sheet of plywood, you don't carry it into the living room and then cut it. You can look up there and you'll see this long piece of plywood go across like this and back sheetrock. And then there's an edge where that protruded. That should have been cut off flush at the wall, and then the next sheet of plywood put going all the way across it, or sheetrock. Why they did that and how they could get away with it, I don't know. I went to put a ceiling fan in the kitchen. Well, you know what? When I went to screw the screws in, there was nothing to screw them into because it had to be a hole this big, and the light fixture sit over here on the side, and all that was over there was just like tape, and they had puttied over it, because when I went to put it in, the screw just went straight through into nothing, no sheetrock. So wow. It's like the ceiling fan is there, but you can only use the light, because if you turn it on, it does like this.
Oh my gosh.
So I didn't take it down, I just left it, but I don't use it. I'm like, stuff like that, mm-hmm. It just half done. And the inspectors for the city allowed it to happen because they didn't go behind them and check and see what they was doing, And I think that they gave the bids to all these private contractors to do stuff. We're looking for the federal government to ensure that it's being done right, but the city government is contracting it out. And then Bob Smart, he built all those houses over there, and they was all done wrong. And there was one house I heard that got burnt down because they wasn't doing it right, and so they had to go back in and redo it. And they burned it down during the era of the black movement with the Black Panthers and stuff, and to make them redo it. So it was just stuff like that. It just irritated me to no end. And then as I got to be an adult, and I'd go down and I would look and I would say stuff to my mom, and she was like, well, son, just leave that alone. Don't. It's like they say, I don't want to make waves with.
Was there a local Black Panther organization?
They came from Seattle.
Came from Seattle.
How
long did they come and set up shop for a while, or would they just come over?
They would just come over. They came down and they recruited a few people from the Tri-City area that was interested in getting involved, but there was no big movement over here. So it was kind of like a hush-hush type situation, because if you can't get a big movement of people involved and you only got maybe 10 people involved in the Black Panther, then you don't really have no Black Panthers.
Were they welcome in the community, or?
Well, yeah, of course. Because see, Black Panthers, people look at it as like, first word associated with is black. It makes you think that it's something that's bad. But they wasn't. They wasn't bad people. They were trying to get equality. Where you could see something that was indifferent or wasn't being done right, they would voice their opinion about it. Right. You see, because we were so held back from our views, as soon as you had a peaceful organization trying to get something done, all of a sudden the government would paint it as a bad organization. And it would make everybody think that these people are really bad. And so the name of Black Panther, they associated with Huey Newton. Down in San Francisco, what they were trying to do was to help the people to rise above the poverty level. They was distributing food, they were doing medication, they was doing doctors and all that. But how did they paint the picture? They painted the picture like there was a bad organization of people. But then once they got to be so big, and then when the government come in, and stuff, and try to remove you through with force and stuff, hey, they was a person that you had to reckon with because they fought back. And then that's what they don't want.
Right.
They don't want you to fight back.
Right.
They want you to do everything in a peaceful manner, but they are the ones with the gun that come in on you.
Right.
In Philadelphia, and when they blowed up that whole city block of people just to try to get at a few people. Yeah. That's the government that's doing that. That's why I say there's no win, because they got the Air Force, the Army, the National Guards, and the Marines.
Yeah.
How you gonna win? There is none. So we have to learn how to sit down and discuss it, just like we're doing, and figure out what it is that we can do to get rid of it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like I had a friend of mine. He said, "Well, hey man, why don't you get involved in the politics of different stuff, so that you have a voice." And I'm like, man, I ain't interested. I was young. I ain't interested in that. Don't nobody want to listen to me. It's just like, oh, he's just babbling on. He's just a radical. If you say how you feel about something in one way, or if you show your indifference about the way that things done, it's like, if it's not somebody else's idea, if you ain't going along with them, then they don't want to hear it. And so the Black Panthers, if it had been enough young people that was involved and organized, I think we could have gotten a lot better situations here during the 60s. And if we had a voice, some educated people here, we wouldn't have gotten taken advantage of our properties and stuff that we had. We would have got the top dollar for it, and it's like right across the street from where I live. They took some of those same houses that they had to move. They either tore them down or you had to move them. Well, there were some people that had a little bit of money. They bought some of them old houses and moved them over across the other side of the fence and set them up, and then lived in them or rented them out. So if they was good enough for you to move them over there and live in, why they wasn't good enough for them to be over there? But they wanted that industrial area, so they have that corridor all the way to the river.
Yeah.
And they got it. So they just redefine and reclaim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the NAACP? Is there a functioning NAACP here?
There's not a functioning NAACP now. With Dallas Barnes and Joe Jackson and his brother Webster and I and a few other people, we talk about it all the time, trying to get people recommitted and let's getting that started again. But it's really hard too, because young people don't see the struggles that the older people, such as myself, went through to have equal opportunities and stuff like that. And so there's no safeguards that we have. The young people don't see it, so they don't really understand it. And the old people are dying out, so there's no one to carry that on. When I was in California, I was involved with the NAACP and my girlfriend and I and stuff. And so it was like job opportunities. And there was a Safeway store that people had complained about putting in applications. They didn't get a job and stuff like that. So we had some Caucasian people that was affiliated with us. So what we had them to do is some of the black people went down and put in an application. And then we had some of the Caucasian people went down and put in an application. Weeks later, the Caucasian people got hired, but the black people didn't. So now we got something that's valid, you understand? And so what we did is we boycotted that store. And the black people in the community just didn't go down there and spend no money. And we was out there marching with our signs and stuff, and it was hurting their business so bad until they're like, well, okay, we're going to hire 3 people, to work in the butcher shop or blah, 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 blah. And so it ended up getting some black people jobs. So the NAACP was really good for us. That was concerned with job discrimination in various forms and stuff like that, or a lot of time with your employer. But the only thing that I saw that was negative to me about the NAACP is that if it didn't go national, it was really hard to get something done on the local level. And to me, that was a negative thing, because you know what? A small concern of yours is worth all the weight in the gold to you. But to them, it's not a big issue. And I don't feel that, you're being represented the way that you should when you have to, take your concerns to the national level, and then they got to view it and see if it's something that they want to actually get involved in, to see if they want to help you with that situation.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, so you talked about local issues. What actions were being taken in the 60s and later to address the local civil rights issues?
We had meetings at a few churches and stuff, to where some of our black leaders and stuff would come together, and we would discuss, trying to take a group of people, our church leaders and stuff, like say Boise Cascade, and they wasn't having fair practices as far as hiring and stuff, and voice your issues with them, and for as trying to get black people hired out there. So then the thing was, now you got to go through the employment office to be able to get hired. But now if you have Caucasian people that's running the establishment, and I think there was Floyd, Jerry Frazier was working there, you can't hire black people just because you're black. See, it was just like when they voted in President Obama. The black people had the illusion that, hey, we got a black president, man, is that we're going to rise above. He going to be able to do this, 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 and that. But the bureaucracy, because he got to deal with the Congress and the Senate, House of Representatives, and everybody is so bent on trying to keep you from doing as much as you can, okay, until you really don't get a chance to do the things that you could. Mm-hmm. And so the black people are now saying, here a few years ago, well, he did nothing for us. Well, see, it wasn't so that he did it for us. He did it for everybody. He made it so that no child should be left behind. You have the opportunity, if you can keep a grade level, a C grade level, then you'll be able to go to school, go to college, and you won't have to pay for it. They're looking at getting a piece of the rock in their hand just for themselves, but you're not looking at the big picture. Mm-hmm. The big picture is that you got to do it for the mass. It's like asking a question, what did Martin Luther King do? He did it for everybody so they have equality instead of just for the black people. He did it for everybody, and so that was the thing here. And with our black leaders and stuff, that few that we had, was trying to see that we had the opportunity to get good jobs. When they was profiling, you go in, you had to put down there, first thing is like when you put in an application, are you Indian, Native American, Island Indian? They have all these different black, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, how do I know that when you see that I'm a black application, you take it and drop it over here in the garbage can or run it through the shredder? So the economical thing, it said that you got to hire so many black people on this job in order to fit a quota. So in that period of time, it made it so that you may have 100 Caucasian people working, but you got to have at least 10 blacks. Mm-hmm. So that's 10%. Okay, so you got a quota that you got to meet. Well, how do we know that quota is being met? We don't know, okay, until you go out and try to see how many people has been hired since that point. Mm-hmm. But now you had 100 people to put in an application. Why wasn't there more? We all put in an application for the same job. It should be the first come, first serve, especially for remedial work like being a janitor. Different stuff, say, well, how many janitors did you have? How many people did you have run the Xerox machine? And so it kind of like had to have somebody to oversee what they was doing, and those was the groups of people that was doing that in order to make it so that it wasn't being profiled in that way. because it was very negative.
Who are some of the important leaders of civil rights efforts in the Tri-Cities?
Reverend Bill Wilkins, McGee, I can't remember what his first name was, Art Fletcher, Tom Jackson, that was Joe Jackson's dad, Franklin D. Noah. He was an educated man, and he was very boisterous with the city council and different stuff like that. And so it was like even on a smaller level that we had a few people that was could kind of help out with that civil rights movement. James Pruitt, he was very instrumental. He was a liaison between the police department and the community. And Reverend F.A. Allen, he was a pastor of Morning Star, and I know he was one of the spokespersons for us as black people. And I'm sure that there's some others. I'd have to really think off the top of my head. I don't remember if C.J. Mitchell was affiliated with it, but I'm kind of sure that he was. With the movement.
What were some of the notable successes of the movement?
Well, the successes was Kirshman Park, the job opportunities that we had, housing. It opened up the doors so that we could buy houses in Kennewick, which I know you heard about. They didn't want black people over there anyway. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of opened up that door. And I won't say a whole lot for Richland, because I remember when just a few black people, C.J. Mitchell, the Browns, and the Rockamores, when they first bought houses out here in Richland, so that movement, that era, opened up the door for us to move up and have a better way of living and better housing and something for our kids to be able to not go through that's already been set in place for you.
What were some of the biggest challenges or failures or kind of things that weren't solved? Maybe things we're still struggling with.
You know what is that since I'm not really in the workforce, I don't know if it's the work, but I'm sure that a lot of working conditions at Hanford in particular is like I know of several people, and this is what I was told. Okay, they said, well, we're going to phase out your job, but I want you to train so and so and so and so how to do it. Okay, so now you actually are losing your job, but they're training somebody else to do your job. Why would they need you to train somebody else to do what you're doing? And then this is a black person now, and you're going to get a job to somebody else. But what you do is you change the title of the job, and then you give it to somebody else which is doing the same thing. So now you can say that you phased it out. Now you got to go somewhere else and look for a job.
Yeah,
I heard that in several instances with different people that's working out here in the Hanford area, and that's what they did. And the thing that really got me is it was like with one person, it was like almost at the point of retirement, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, we're going to phase what you're doing out. So now if you don't have the amount of years in that it takes for you to be able to get your full retirement, you got to figure out something else in order to be able to get it. And you got to go to work back for the government, and so if there's no government job for you to do, and so you just kind of like, your dream of being able to sit down and do nothing, you end up have to go back to work somewhere else. And I've seen a few people that do that. I'm like, I don't understand it. You worked out there for all those years to retire, and now you got to go work somewhere else. Something is wrong with that picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any memories of the? You would have been very young, but I wonder if you heard about the Hazel Scott case in 1950.
I heard about it. Matter of fact, I read about it. And when she came to the bus station in Pasco.
Yeah.
And she tried to eat at the lunch counter.
Yeah.
And they refused to let her sit at the lunch counter and eat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And she complained about it. And I believe that I read in the history that she was married to a Caucasian person. Okay. And you can probably Google that, because I had a time, and I was like, just 2 or 3 months ago, I was telling somebody about it. And that's my girlfriend. And
she's like, "Where are you?
Are you done yet?" Or yeah, is more likely.
By these guys.
Yeah, but with that was something that my mom had told me about her being there and stuff. See, because what really got me is that I always wanted to eat at that lunch counter.
Yeah.
Okay, when I was a kid, and we would go to the bus station, and I would go downtown and get papers from the Tri-City Herald. Okay, and I'd get 10 papers, and we got a nickel a piece for selling them. Okay, and so like 25 cents 50 cents was a lot of money for us little kids. And we would go to various places and try to sell these newspapers where we get,
Mm-hmm.
And I'd go by the bus station, and I'd see that big lunch counter in there and stuff, But when you'd go in, it's like there was never no black people in there. There was always Caucasian, and they always turned and looked at you. And not only that, even at Woolsworth, it was the same way. When you went in there to sit down at that lunch counter, is that the Caucasian people that was in there, they wasn't used to seeing blacks sitting next to them eating, and so they turn and they look at you, and so it made you feel somewhat indifferent, to where, well, hey, I'm not going back over there anymore. So it was kind of would you please quit?
Were you directly involved in any civil rights efforts?
Not really involved, but I participated in the march and stuff that they had. That was about as much as I could do, or just making people aware, or talking with the black people that was my age, or giving them my view about stuff that we need to be trying to do.
Yeah.
To change ourselves. That was my thing, is trying to get other people motivated, and telling them, the things that I think. See, because me is like, since I wasn't being raised racist, when I hear somebody saying something that's racist, then I would try to show them the difference in, you don't need to do that. Well, why don't you do this, do that, And then they'll make it even better, because now it's like a friend told me, if you can educate one person on not to be racist, is that he'll change 100 people, because he'll go back and say, hey, have you ever heard this before? A Caucasian guy walks over to a black guy, and he gets to know him, and I've had this happen. I'm going to give you a scenario. A friend of mine and I, we went over to the Cowboy Club over on Kennewick Avenue over in Kennewick. That's what it was named at the time. I don't know what it's named now, because when I used to go to the tavern. And since I was kind of a Western type dude, I used to ride horses and all that. I had my boots on, my hat, and my dust and all my gear. And my buddy Johnny Mock, he had on his stuff. And we went in and we sat down, and the bartender came over and gave us a beer. Well, everybody was looking at us like, what are they doing in here? So we sit there drinking our beer and stuff. And so pretty soon, one Caucasian dude, he got up and he walked over and he says, hey, how you doing? Well, pretty good. How you? My name is Bill. What's yours? My name is Aubrey. He extended his hand. I shook his hand. And so then he just made just a little trivia talk. And so then I told the bartender, I said, hey, give Bill a beer. Man, let me tell you something. When the end of that conversation ended, we was best of buddies. You know what he did? He went back and he told his buddies, he all right. So next time we went over there, people didn't look at us the way that they had looked at us the first time that we were there, because they was afraid of the unknown. Mm-hmm. But because he got educated just that quick, you understand? It's like, man, they're all right. So I hear Caucasian people say all the time, man, you know, you're different than them other people. And I say to them, what other people do you know? See, because you're trying to make a difference, but what you're doing, you're stereotyping off of something you've seen on TV or something that you heard, because evidently you haven't interact with enough black people to be able to see what their views is, to see how they feel about situations. And we all feel and pretty much bleed the same. We all want the same thing. You know, it's just that you got it and I want it. That's the only difference is. You know, but once you get to know me, you'll say, you know, he's really a nice guy. He's not as radical as I thought that he was, but I can be. You know, yeah, I can be.
Sure.
You know, yeah, you know, if you're doing something to me, brother, you better believe I'm gonna put it on you as best I can. You know, but because you don't see that side, and so with my friends, when I would hear them saying stuff that was negative or going to be detrimental to them, I'm like, no, you don't want to do that. See, this is the way that you do it, and then you don't have to deal with that problem, you know.
Yeah.
And then it was like, whoa. So, you know, that was kind of my thing for as the black movement was concerned, is educating your friends that's around you to emulate what you're doing.
Yeah.
Don't do what's expected of you. Do something totally different, and then you catch everybody off guard. And they'll say, wow, you know, he's different than what I thought. You know, I didn't realize that people was like that. You know, and I get that all the time from people.
Yeah.
Is that I'm very outspoken about whatever it is. You know, if you don't want to hear it, don't ask me. If you don't want to hear the truth, don't ask me. Because I'm going to tell you just like it is. You know, and so.
How did the larger national civil rights movement influence civil rights efforts here in the Tri-Cities?
You know, it made us aware because we was looking at on the media down south, and in Detroit, Chicago, Michigan, and New York. And so we got a chance to hear a lot about Malcolm X, Andrew Young, the Abernathy, Reverend Martin Luther King, and all the things that they were doing trying to get equality in all the places. Even though there have been black people in New York ever since back in the 1800s that was prosperous, when they redefined the area, when they first came in, I think it was 98th or 99th Street or somewhere in there, they came in and they tore all that out in order to be able to build the high rises and all of this and that, you know, and but black people was musicians, and you know, you had your doctors and your lawyers, and I didn't know that back then until I started like doing a little research on it to see that we was well represented back then. And so when I started looking at the movement, I started seeing the movement in the South, and then I looked at the same movement that was happening that was in New York and up in that part of the area in the North. And the difference was Martin Luther King was preaching peace. The Black Panthers was, if you do it to me, I'm going to do it back to you. And that was the difference. And so the Black Panthers wasn't willing to take that head beating, the dog biting, the water hoses, and all the rest of what the people in the South had to try to endure through a peaceful movement, you know, and that was the difference that really impacted me, because I had two views to look at: a peaceful view and a positive, negative view. And out of the positive, negative, don't allow it to happen to you, then it won't happen. But if you allow it, it becomes a condition. Such as my telling you about the guy calling me Smokey, my supervisor. If I hadn't been so fear of my job, I could have stopped at the first day that he did it. They'd either had to let me go or he wouldn't have did it no more.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, and so it's like looking at the positive out of it, you know, and so it's a positive negative situation. You know.
From your perspective and experience, what was different about civil rights efforts here compared to the national effort?
We didn't have a big enough movement here. We didn't have enough people that was involved. We had too many older people that was afraid. They brought the South here with them. Don't make waves, you know, just go along with the program, go along to get along. And then the younger people had more of a radical view, and I among them, is that I'm not going to let it happen to me. You know, and that was up into the 60s. I started kind of feeling like that as far as getting beat up and that type of a thing. Is like, well, that's not going to happen to me.
Did it ever happen to you?
No, sir. No, I never did get beat up. None of that. I was never in no fights. I never was in no fights at school. No, I kind of like missed all that. Most of the kids didn't mess with me because I was pretty big. You know, I mean, I was skinny and tall, but I was pretty big. And I think I got into one fight in junior high school. And, man, after that was over with.
What were your experiences like? Did you ever go over to Kennewick? And because I've heard a lot about, I guess what I want to specifically ask about is sundown laws in the sign. And I wanted to ask if you ever had any experience with that.
I never saw the sign. I heard about the sign. Okay. The only time that I went to Kennewick, I can really give you some views on that. Is I can remember as a little kid, my mom took us to the Roxy Theater that was over there, and that was in the daytime at a matinee, and then we were out of there. But see, I didn't know nothing about out of there before dark. But I can remember in probably 50. Let's see, I was in high school, junior high school. Probably about 60. Somewhere in there, there was you still couldn't live over there. It was a Caucasian lady, and I can't remember what she had did, but she had had to go to prison, and she had a black lady, and her name was Martha Walker, I believe, that worked for her. She gave her house, and I can remember it was next to Kohler's grape field, because I can remember us going to the grape field. You know what? It might have been even in the 50s when that happened. They burnt that house down so that no black people could live over there. Okay. I can remember my sister was married to a guy named Dave Dumas, and we went over to the dojo that they had over on Kennewick Avenue, which is a karate practice. And when the karate practice was over, we were driving back out of Kennewick, and we were in a Volkswagen, and the police pulled in behind us. And I told Dumas, I said, man, the police is behind us. He said, yeah, I know. I said, well, make sure you don't be speeding, man, because you don't want to get no ticket over here. And we were coming out of the Highlands, going down, and we're going to go down and go over on the overpass, come back into Pasco. When we got right to the top of that hill where that church is, the police put his light on us and pulled us over. So he comes up and he asked for his driver's license, and he showed him to him, and he looks all in the car. And so my sister was sitting in the back, and I was sitting in there, and him. And so he asked me, he said, what are you pulling me over for? He said, because you was driving too slow. And so he says, well, the only reason that I was driving under the speed limit is because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't speeding so you wouldn't give me no ticket. So the officer said, well, what are you doing over here? And he says, well, I just came from karate practice. He said, well, I'm going to tell you something. Don't let me catch you over here no more. And he turned around, walked back, and got in his car, and we got out of Kennewick. So the only time that I can remember going over to Kennewick other than that, we went to the Highland Theater, drive-in, and you know where that was, as soon as you get up there and right there on Clearwater, and across from Vista. And, man, we would go to that theater, and then we were out of there. And we would go to Sanders Field, was where they had baseball games. And when we got through doing the baseball, we were out of there. but it wasn't like go over there and hang around.
Yeah.
And something that I'll reiterate, you didn't live over there, so there was no reason to be over there, you know? Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to go over here and just joy around over here in Kennewick at nighttime.
Yeah.
But it was that I found that the police didn't even want you over there in the daytime, you know? And even since back then, I've been pulled over in Kennewick and get a negative attitude out of the police. See, because when he pulled me over, the first thing I'm saying when he walk up to the car is, "What's the problem, officer?" You know, and well, do you have your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance? I'm like, I do. And I get it and I give it to him. And I want to know, again, what is the problem? Well, I noticed that your tail light is out, or you didn't give a turn signal. It's always some negative misdemeanor crap, you know. And I'm like, okay, well, let me check it and see. Flip on the turn signal is working. The brake light is working. So there's really no reason for him to pull me over than just to see who I am, and get my information. So in the event that he see me over there again, he know who I am, because he really don't have no reason for stopping me. Mm-hmm. And then let me go. I've had that to happen right here in Pasco, not only in Kennewick. But in Kennewick, I was just, as a kid and as a young adult, I knew, as they say, your place, and it was not in Kennewick because I didn't have no reason to be over there.
Yeah.
So I stayed out of there because I didn't want no problem with the police, period.
Makes sense.
Yeah, because, you know, like, the police is the higher authority. And whenever he says something, that's what it is. A friend of mine and I had been out in Richland one night, and this is in the late 70s. And he had this beautiful black Cadillac photo Brougham with the gangster white walls on and all that. And we were coming out of Richland. And I told him, you know, Columbia Center Boulevard, that overpass, I told him, I said, make sure you're not speeding. I said, because the police always sits up under here, see, and you won't see his car until you're right up on it, okay, because it sits in a shadow. And so he said to me, Aubrey Lee, I'm not speeding. And so I looked over the speedometer, and he's going 60 miles an hour. Sure enough, State Patrol. So the State Patrol gets behind us. He didn't pull us over. He just followed us. When we got about halfway of the distance between the bridge and that overpass there at Columbia Center Boulevard, because it wasn't Eli, because it wasn't built then, he put his light on. And so my buddy Charles said, man, I don't know why he turned his light on, because I'm not doing nothing. So I told him, I said, well, you better stop. He said, man, I'm not going to stop. I ain't thinking about him. I ain't doing nothing. So he just kept on driving. Next thing I know, I see State Patrol coming from the other direction from Pasco, and he comes up in where that little turnaround is. He turns around in the turnaround. And so I'm telling him, I'm like, man, you better stop. You know, I said, because you don't want no problem with these police. He said, but I'm not doing it. I said, man, just go ahead and stop. So then he finally pulls over and he stops. The police pulls up behind him. State Patrol, and then there was a State Patrol behind him. And both of them get out of their car. They're on each side of the car. And so he said, what's the problem? Officer said, give me your driver's license and registration, proof of insurance. So he gave it to him. He goes back and he gets on whatever, and he calls in to find out who he is or whatever. And he comes back, and he said, well, what do you pull me over for? He said, you were speeding. And he said, no, I wasn't speeding. He said, yes, you were, because I have you on my radar, and it said you were speeding. So then I spoke up. I said, no, he wasn't speeding. I said, that's not true. I said, because I told him, I said, make sure you slow down, because the police is always sitting up underneath this overpass. I said, and he told me he wasn't, and I looked at his speedometer. I said, he was going 60 miles an hour. I said, so he wasn't speeding. He said, yes, he was, because I have it on my radar that he's going over 60 miles an hour. So he asked me, he said, well, how fast was I going? So officer said, you were going 80 miles an hour. He said, I wasn't going no 80 miles, I wasn't going but 60. So now here's his argument. So I'm telling him, I said, man, I said, don't even argue with the man. I said, you know how fast you was going. I said, just wait until you go to court. He said, well, man, why would I sign a ticket, accepting a ticket for going 80 when I know I wasn't going that fast? He said, when I go to court, he said, the judge is just going to look at the ticket and he can see where I signed it, and that's what it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And so the officer say, well, I tell you what, you're going to have to sign this ticket now. If you don't, I'm going to take you to jail. So he said, well, I'm not going to sign the ticket. So he said, well, if I write the ticket for $70, will you sign it? And he said, no, I'm not going to sign it. It's because I wasn't going over the speed limit. Man, we hashed back and forth. And so Charles got frustrated and he drove off. And the police is right behind us, man. I mean, the lights is going like you. I'm like, man, what are you doing? You better stop, man. I said, because you don't know what these police are going to do. So finally I talked him into stopping. And so then the officer came up and he wasn't irate about it, and like, well, why did you drive off? He said, because. He said, man, it's frustrating. He said, because you're trying to force me to sign a ticket that saying that I was going 70 miles an hour when you said I was going 80 at first, that I was going the speed limit. And he says, I'm not going to sign that ticket. So the officer told him, he says, well, when you go to court, you have the opportunity to explain to the judge what the situation is. Okay, and so he says, but see, that's not fair. Why would I have to go to court to explain a situation when I didn't sign a ticket say that I was going 70 miles an hour when the judge is going to hit the gavel and I got to go and pay for it? And he says, well, that's blind justice. And he signed the ticket, and then we left and went on about our business. And when time came to go to court, he told me, he said, I lose more money, because he was an iron worker. He said, I lose more money going to court than what I would going missing work. He said, so it don't make sense for me to go to court. He said, because it's already, I'm guilty because I signed the ticket. I'm like, yeah, that is kind of messed up. So the judge is not hearing nothing that you're saying. So anyway, he went ahead and paid the ticket so that he didn't, as far as they was concerned, he was guilty, and he was guilty anyway when he signed it. And so, it's kind of a bad thing. And I talked to a person, he says, well, it's not an admission of guilt. And so it says down at the bottom of the ticket that it's not an admission of guilt. But if you sign it and you accept it, who you think the police going to believe? You or them? I had the same thing happen to me out here in Richland. Edward Ash and I had went to the river shore back in the day. And I went there to get a drink. And the guy that was there, he was dancing back and forth, a little fat guy and stuff. And he didn't pay any attention to us standing there at the bar. So I didn't yell out, hey, I want a drink, or blah, 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 blah. I just told Ed, I said, man, come on, let's go. So we got in the car, and we saw Rayford Geis and Ray Andrews, and they said, man, where you going? I said, we're going to go down here to the bowling alley, and they had some super good hamburgers with an egg on it and all that, I said, let's go and have a hamburger. And it's about probably about 11:30 at night. And so we left out of there, and we was crossing Swift, and I looked down the street, and I saw the State Patrol coming from where the Federal Building is. And now he's about a block from the intersection. The light changes. Just as I pull off, this guy is trying to beat the light, so he turns in the front of me making a left-hand turn. So I stop right in the middle of the intersection. The guy behind me had pulled off behind me, so when he stopped, now I'm trapped in the middle of the intersection. And here the police is, now he's about a half a block or less. So then I went ahead and crossed the intersection. As soon as I crossed the intersection, he throws his light on me. So he pulls me over, he gets my license and all that, and he asked me, had I been drinking? And I told him, I said, no. I said, I haven't had a drink. I said, I went down there to the club to get a drink, as I said, and I didn't get served, so, we were going to get something to eat. So he said, okay, I want you to do a sobriety test. I want you to hold your head back and put your finger on your nose and all this different crap. I did that. Then he wanted me to walk backwards up the incline of the sidewalk in that crack, So I did that. And then he says, well, I'm going to have to write you a ticket. I said, what are you writing me a ticket for? He said, failing to yield the right-of-way to an officer. I said, but I didn't. I said, you didn't see that guy that turned in the front of me? I said, he forced me to stop in the middle of the intersection. I said, I couldn't back up. I said, I only had a choice but to go across the street. And I told him, I said, I saw you when you was down at the Federal Building. That was 2 blocks away. I said, why in the world would I pull out in the front of an officer when I'm seeing you down there, you know? So he wrote me a ticket anyway. So when I went to court, the officer wasn't there. And the judge, asked me how did I plead. I told him not guilty. And so he says, well, we're going to have to get him in. And so I probably stayed in court for a couple hours before they finally got in touch with him and he came. Okay. And so then they had the officer to get up and tell his story. And so he said, well, yeah, he failed to yield the right of way and I was blah, 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 blah. And so then he had me to get up and tell my story. And I told him just what I told you. I said, I saw him down the street. I said, I went to go across the intersection. I say, and just as I started across the intersection, I say, this guy was trying to make a left-hand turn. I say, and actually he ran the red light. I say, and he turned right in the front of me. I say, and so I had to stop. I said, I didn't have no choice. I say, so now I'm like in no man's land in the middle of the road. I said, the only choice I had was just to go ahead and go across the street. I said, the officer was far enough down the street that there was no danger to him, And he says, well, do you have a witness to that? I say, I sure do. Because Edward Ash that was with me was there. And he says, well, you better get him up here. And so he got up and told the same similar story, which was true. And so then he says, well, I guess I have no choice but to not find you guilty. I said, well, I sure appreciate that, Your Honor. I said, but tell me this. Since it caused me to lose a day off of work, am I going to be reimbursed for being off work? And he told me, just like that other man had said, well, that's blind justice. And he hit that gavel telling me to get on there. He didn't say get out of here. He just hit the gavel in case it's over and you can leave. But see, that's no fair because I told the officer, I said, please don't give me no ticket because I wasn't doing anything wrong. So what's up with that? And so, it's just like, did he not want to be wrong? Was he being racist? Because racism exists in every place that you go. It's not just in Pasco. It's not just in Kennewick. It's not just in Richland. It's in Eltopia too. It's in Sunnyside. It's in Prosser. I've been in Yakima as a teenager and had police to pull us over back in the 60s and the 50s. And the question is, what are you doing over here? And don't let me catch you over here no more and stuff like that. And we was afraid to drive our cars over there. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And we would borrow our parents' car or somebody else to go back up there because we was interested in them young ladies that was up there, so that we would have, and you had to go right through Union Gap. And it was always in the Union Gap area where you got pulled over the majority of the time from the police and stuff. And so it's not just a situation that's here in the Tri-Cities. It's a situation that's everywhere. And we have to learn how to get beyond that so that we can all live here together because we're all dependent on each other.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't make sense to me. And I've lived long enough to where most stuff I can just let it slide off my back and just continue just to go ahead and do my thing. I don't have to interact with you if you don't want to interact with me, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And if you do, then hey, we okay. Mm-hmm.
How were your experiences in other places different from the Tri-Cities? What kinds of work, housing, and social opportunities were available to you?
Well, I won't say Los Angeles because when I went to Los Angeles, I had a friend of mine that owned an apartment building, which I managed for them, and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, they owned an apartment building, had a 28-unit apartment building. And so I worked for them managing their apartment building and stuff like that. I went to Dominguez Technical Institute when I was down there and took a welding course because I wanted to be an underwater welder until my instructor told me, he says, do you realize how much carbon and stuff that's going to be in your nose when you're down there in a bell? And I'm like, no. And he says, well, do you ever blow your nose when you get through welding and stuff and all the soot and the carbon coming out? I'm like, yeah. He said, well, it's going to be way worse. So if I was you, that would be something that I wouldn't do. And you know, he was like, as you say, a soul brother, but he was a white man. And whenever I seen him, and I still say it to the day, he say, "What it is, what it ain't, what it be like, bro." You know, I thought that was so cool. You know, and that was the thing that he told me. I said, "Well, I want to be a underwater welder." And he's like, "No, Aubrey, you don't want to do that." He says, "I'm telling you, you know, these are the conditions that you're going to be doing. You know, and if you're going to do anything, just go and get you a job, but you don't want to do that." You know, so he was a person that had my interests at heart. You know, and so I really like that. And like I said, I worked for my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law and stuff when I was there. When I moved to Vallejo, California, I had a girlfriend that was well established, and she was involved in politics and stuff, and she was retired at an early age, and so I lived with her for a while. And then I went to work for a moving company, Cozy Moving and Storage, and drove truck, moved furniture, and until I got my back all racked up moving the piano. But they never did want to fix their junk and stuff, you know, and like, hey, you need to fix that truck, you need to do this, you know. I was driving a diesel truck, and the passenger seat actually had a metal band that you band boxes with to hold the seat to the floor. And when you stopped, the seat would do this, rock. And I told my supervisor, I said, you know what? If I ever have an emergency where I got to slam on the brakes real hard, if that band bust, that guide is going to go through the windshield. You know, I drove that truck over a year and 65, and they never did fix that seat. And all they had to do, they could either weld the frame to the thing that was on the floor. And then, well, we don't have time to fix that, you know, blah, 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 blah. You know, it was always one of them old kind of excuses and stuff. So, you know, it was like your value really wasn't as worth anything to them other than moving their furniture and getting stuff done. Mm-hmm. You know, and then when I finally hurt my back moving one of them pianos just like that upright, and me and another guy, and we got it tipped back, bringing it out of a storage vault, and he let it go. And it had that strain on my back, you know, and my hand was on there on that thing. I couldn't even turn it loose. And I had to raise that piano back, and it messed up 3 of my vertebrae, my L4, 5, 6 in my lower lumbar and stuff. And so I ended up moving because my mom was sick and stuff. And I went through the state industrial deal, and I went to beauty school and that. But down there, it was, I don't know if it was a black thing. I don't think it was. It was hard to find a job. It just took a long time, mm-hmm. especially when you relocate from one area to the other area.
Yeah.
And like I said, my girlfriend, she was well established and stuff, so she had a nice house and all of that. And so I didn't really see the poverty thing. In L.A., I very seldom went over on the east side in Watts or over in Compton, and the few times that I did go through there coming from school, you could see a lot of the destruction that had happened back in the 60s where the buildings and stuff was burned down, and you know they didn't go back in and redo it. Mm-hmm. They had built a project and stuff, you know, because I was looking for them to try to reclaim that whole area, because that area used to be really central, was really popular back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. Had nightclubs and theaters and et cetera on it. And so when it got burned down and stuff, I kind of like thought to myself, I'm like, you know, they'll come back in and an urban renewal type situation will come in and buy all this vacant land and stuff up along the strip and then redevelop it, which is maybe something that's coming in the future. I don't know what's happened to it since I left, but you know, those are the things that, you know, for us that housing thing. And the police was murder on you in California. I tell you, they had Chief Darrell Gates, batter ram, you know, and that was his thing. They even had a song out about him, you know, and the police was extremely hard on you. I had an officer pull me over. Matter of fact, I was going with a Caucasian girl at the time. And I won't say it just because she was in the car with me. And I, even with the black police, is the thing that got me. Now, he's got his co-person is called Caucasian police officer. I say, is he trying to be extra hard on me because she's in the car with him to show her that, hey, I'm equal on black people such as I am on anybody else? You know, because he had no reason to pull me over. And he says, well, where are you going? No, he said, where are you coming from? I said, I'm coming from home. And he said, well, where you live? I said, I live at 4044 Gelber Place, which was right up the street. And he says, well, here on your registration, it says that you live in Washington. I said, well, yeah, I do. He said, well, I just asked you where you live. I said, well, listen, I got to live somewhere. I said, I'm down here going to school. I say, so it don't require me to change my driver's license or my registration as long as I'm out of the state every 90 days. I say, and I go back home and then I come back, you know. And so he, you know, made me prove to him that I was going to school, which I had my welding gear and all my credentials and stuff was in the trunk, and I showed it to him. And when he got through looking at that, the thing that surprised me, he told me, and this is a black officer now, don't let me catch you back over here, because if I do, that car is going to belong to me. I said, now why are you going to take my car? And he just turned and walked away and got in his car and drove off. But I tell you what, every time I left the house, man, I was looking for him. Because if he had impounded my vehicle for whatever reason it was going to take an act of Congress for me to get it out and money. Mm-hmm. See, because all they got to do is move it and take it over in Inglewood, you know, and I'm living over in the Baldwin Hills area. I don't know where it's at, you know, because, you know, L.A. has built up different precincts in the city and stuff. So if you're over in Compton, they got a whole system over there. If you're in Inglewood, there's a police station over there. You see, and if you're in Baldwin Hills, they got a police station over there. So in different areas, depending on, they can shift you around. They shift your stuff around, so you just can't say it's going to be there. And so if it's there for 4 or 5 days and they're charging you $35 or $45 a day to get your car out, plus the initial towing fee, so it costs you $200 or $300 for no reason. Mm-hmm. You know, mm-hmm. And anyway, you know, I hate to just babble on, but you know, it's just, to answer the question, you know, is like that, and then most of the people was living in LA was the jungle, and it was like all the black people that had moved into all these real nice apartments that the Caucasian people used to live in. They had moved out into the valley, and so that was being bought up and renovated in real nice area and stuff. And the other people was, like I said, over in Watts and Compton. I didn't go over there that much, so I never did get a chance to see what that was like or their project.
Just have 2 questions left, kind of big reflective questions. What would you like future generations to know about living in the Tri-Cities during the Cold War?
The contribution that we as black people made to help build up this and the sacrifices to build this project out here, because we did a lot of the basis. Like I said, for them reactors and stuff, and we poured the floors and did all that hard remedial work. Not saying that Caucasian people couldn't do them, but it was a lot of back-breaking work that you had to get in there and do, and you know, and then you had to do the rebar and all of that, and it was kind of like we were black gold, you know, in essence, that we were very important to the contribution that we made, and it probably would have taken a lot longer to do what we did. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, you don't take a mule to the Kentucky Derby. Mm-hmm. He can't outrun a thoroughbred. So, you know, if it's just like me and the guy that's digging the ditch, you know, hey, I dug the whole ditch, because every time you look around, he got a cigarette in his mouth. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so I could outwork him on any given day, because it was something that I had to do, because I had the motivation, because I was trying to be able to put food on the table. I had to pay rent. And with him, it was just like, oh, well, you know. And then he had somebody that was looking out for him. I didn't have nobody looking out for me. So for our future generation, they need to know the contribution that we had and why we had to work so hard. It wasn't just to put food on the table and clothes on our backs and for shelter, we had to work hard because that was all that was there for us to be able to do. We were the mule for that generation. You know what I'm saying? It's like when they didn't have tractors, we had to go out there and plow. You know, and so they didn't have enough strong back people to get in there and do it with a song in their mouth and in their heart. Mm-hmm. You know, mm-hmm. It's just like, so you go to the resource that you have. So they recruited, from what I heard and what I have read and heard over the past, they recruited black people from the South to come up here to work out there in that Hanford area. And that's how a lot of them got out here, was through that. And some came, and then they would go back home or call back home or write back home and tell them about how good it is, you know. Hey, man, check it out. I'm making 65 cents an hour. Man, that's more money than I ever made. Only making 25 cents an hour out here. You know, I'm going to send you $10 and you get on that bus and you come. So they leave their family. They come out here and they work and they make up enough money to send back and get their family, you know, and then they move out here.
Is there anything else that you would like to mention related to migration, segregation, and civil rights and how they've impacted your life in the Tri-Cities?
Something that we don't want to have to go back through. I hope that I've helped lay the foundation, and the black people that gave contributions to where if you read the story, you don't have to experience it. It's like listening as someone else. My friend told me that one time. He said, if you just listen to what I'm trying to tell you, you won't have to experience it. So just take my word for it. You know, and that's what I did. And it was just like when I bought my first house on 17th. I had just got a settlement from Franklin County when I got my foot crushed. And I think they gave me like $4,000, something like that. And my friend, which was an older man, he told me, he said, don't take your money and go out there and spend it on buying a car. He said, go and buy you a piece of the rock. And I looked at him and I said, what's a piece of the rock? What are you talking about? He said, buy you a piece of America. I said, what do you mean? He said, go and buy you some property or buy you a home. He said, because that car is going to depreciate in a few years and won't be worth nothing. He said, but that house or that land will appreciate. He said, and it'll always be of value to you. And the longer you keep it, the more in value it's going to go up. And his last words was, take my word for it so you won't have to experience not doing it, because I've already did it and I laid the groundwork for you. So just take my word for it. And I looked at him for a while, you know, and then when I got my money, I took half of it, I went and bought me a car. And then I took the other half of the money and I went and bought me a house. And let me tell you something, I still own that house. And I just said, thank God for that. Because I see so many of my buddies that don't have a house and they still paying rent, you know, and that was in, 72. You know, I'm like, wow, that was the best piece of advice that I ever could have had from a person that already went through, you know, getting to where I want to be. Mm-hmm. And so for the young people that's coming along, I hope that they be able to realize the sacrifices and stuff that everybody did so that they can have it much better. And with my daughter, I try to educate her all the time about how it was so that she can see how it is, so that she can move along and take advantage of all the advancements that's at her fingertips.
Yeah.
And for her to educate her children so that they can move along and have better chances in life, so that they don't have to go back through the struggle and stuff that we went through. And God forbid if things continue to go the way that it is that we will regress, the whole United States of America. You know, and let me say this before we can discontinue or get done. I had went on to the Caribbean on a cruise, my girlfriend and I. And I think we were in Jamaica. and they were showing us all these plantation rum places that they had, because we didn't see any of the cane fields and all that kind of stuff, but they showed us these old plantation rum factories that they had, and how they had the channels for the water to go through them, and you could actually walk into them and see all of that. And so the guy that was giving us the tour, he started laughing, and he says, he says, when we want comedy, we watch the news of the United States. He's saying that's the comedy to us. And he started laughing, And so my girlfriend's daughter told him, she said, listen, we're not here to hear that. We're here for you to be a guided tour guide and just tell us about what we're seeing and what we're going through and what it was, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need to hear that. And with saying that is that the United States right now is a laughing stock of the whole world. Everybody is looking at us when they used to look up to us, and is that we have got to make a change. And if you see something that's being done wrong and you don't do something about it, you are as much of the problem as anybody else. And as we become adults, we all know the difference between right and wrong. And so it would be wrong for me to do something to somebody that's not done anything to me. And so those are the things that I try to instill in my daughter, because the rest of my kids, well, all of them are grown. My daughter, she's 27, be 27 her birthday. But I try to instill that into her, so that she won't have all that negative stuff to look at. She have nothing but positive stuff. Yeah. And like, she wanted to be a veterinarian when she was going to school. Love animals and still do. And I would tell her all the time, I say, now this is what you do. I say, all of those Caucasian kids that you're going to school with, they want to be doctors and stuff. I say, you take the same classes that they take. I say, and then that's going to be your guidebook to get you into college to where you'll be able to be that veterinarian, because you'll have taken all the required courses. Because, see, their parents know what classes for them to take, and they're going to make sure that they get them. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? And so then she's like, well, yeah, Dad, that's what I'll do. And so she was honor roll student and all that kind of stuff. And she was, right up the ladder until she got right at the end of high school. And I don't know what got in her or got in her mind. It's just like she lost focus, and it would seem like, and I should know, and this is what I think it was, but I don't know, because we were staying over on 17th, and all of her friends was Hispanic and a few Caucasian and a couple Asian, very few black kids. And when she started going to high school, it was like a whole new world opened up for her to be around the black kids and stuff, and her being raised semi-white, and having a whole different outlook, and the culture is like, all this is new to me. And so if it's new, I want to do it. I want to be around it. I want to see what it's all like, and it's all fun. And she's trying to solve the problems for everybody else. Is that she let herself go lacking. And so then she lost her vision. And once she lost that vision, then being a veterinarian is something that just kind of like flew out the window. And I'm like, wow, I say, that's too bad. So, it's like we got to stay focused on what we want to do. Don't let nobody deter you from doing that. You got to have somebody to help you along the way to put you into the things that you need, so that vehicle will get you to where you want to go.
Yeah.
And she's doing okay now. She just started a new job today with Charter College as an intake counselor. And she's doing okay. She was working for T-Mobile as a consultant out there selling phones and stuff, and she did quite well with it, But with this job, she won't have to work as hard, and she'll make as much money, if not more, because she was doing pretty good. I mean, she's only 27, and she made $50-some thousand last year selling cell phones. But man, you look at all the hours that she worked for minimum wage, but then her commission check, would be the thing that would take her over the top in order to be able to make the money. But you know, the thing that got me is that, in which I didn't really know that much about it, is that out of the commission check, they take a higher percentage of taxes out of it. You know, and I'm like, well, how do you know where your taxes is going? You know, with that, I mean, it's on there, you know, and I'm like, but how do you know? You know, is that, okay, they take 8% normally, and okay, they're going to take 10% or they're going to take 20%. How do you know that they pay that 20% into whatever fund they said it? They just put it on a piece of paper and tell you that. You don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is they taking that money and say, okay, we're going to split this up between our managers over here, and then we're going to take this other 10%, and then we're going to put it into this fund over here? You really don't know. And so I encourage, I said, you know what? I said, you need to get in contact with the IRS and tell them, hey, they was taking out 15% of my money because I made X amount of dollars. I said, because it seemed like you're being double taxed. Because, see, the IRS is going to get you when you go into different tax brackets. So why is there a different tax on commission? I don't understand it, you know, and it might very well be, but I just don't understand. It's almost like a double standard because you don't really know what's going on with your money. You know, and it just kind of like concerns me. And I told her just the other day, I said, maybe it's something I need to look into for you. Because, you know, she's just kind of passive, aggressive, you know. It's just like, if you don't do nothing to me, I won't do nothing to you.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Dad, I'd rather just let it go and then even be bothered with it. Because, you know what, I got another job now, no big deal, you know. I'm going to make more money for them, you know, and blah, 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 you know. I'm like, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Well, Aubrey, thank you so much for coming and interviewing with us today. It's been a wonderful interview.
It was very enlightening for me. You know, you can see I got a gift to gab. So
Yeah, no doubt. All right. Well, thank you so much.